ready?
Now I am.
Tonight is what we refer to as a workshop in docket 8816, which is the petition of Swanton LLC to a certificate of public good pursuant to 30 DSA section 248 for the construction of an up to 20 megawatt wind-powered electric generation plant powered by up to 7 wind turbines located along Rocky Ridge in Swanton, Vermont. My name is John Cotter. I'm the staff attorney at the Public Service Board, and I'm assisting the board in its review of this case. This case is actually being heard directly by the board. With me tonight are Greg Faber and Mary Jo Kolevsky. They're both utilities analysts at the board and are also assisting the board in its review of the case. Before we get started, I do want to take a few moments to outline what tonight is about and what it's not about. Tonight is an opportunity for all the people in attendance to ask Swanton Wind questions about the proposed project so that you can better understand what it is that has been proposed. What we hope is that such an exchange of information this evening will help people decide if they want to intervene and act as a party in the case, or if they have already decided to intervene, then perhaps they might be able to ask some questions tonight to help focus their concerns in advance of the upcoming discovery process and eventually the final testimony by people who do intervene. Tonight is not what we call a public hearing. The board, in cases like this, we call it 248 cases, which are cases where somebody wants to build a generation or transmission facility. And we do hold public hearings in 248 cases. And we already hold one in this case, but that's not tonight. And what the public hearing is, it's an event where members of the public have an opportunity to just basically get up and talk about their concerns about a project, and sometimes people talk about what they like about a proposed project. But that's not what we're doing tonight. Tonight is about an exchange of information between members of the public and the folks from Swanton Wind. The public hearing in this matter, for people who are interested if you're not aware, is currently expected to occur during the week of July 17th. And that would be after much more testimony is filed and discovery is taking place and there's more information available for people to digest before they make their comments at the public hearing. It will also be closer in time to the actual evidentiary hearings, so the board will have the public comments more fresh in its mind as the evidentiary hearings approach. Tonight is also not an opportunity to engage in cross-examination of the folks from Swanton Wind. Cross-examination is where you basically challenge the credibility of a witness or challenge that witness's testimony. That happens during the evidentiary hearing, and everybody who does become a party to this case will have a full opportunity to cross-examine all of the witnesses during the evidentiary hearing. So we do have a lot of people here tonight, so keeping that, given that number of people here, I do encourage people to keep in mind the guidelines of what tonight is or is not about, because what we want to be able to do is get through as many questions that people have as possible so that we can get as much information as possible before we run out of time. As I mentioned, there is an opportunity for live public comment that is going to happen later in the schedule in July right now. However, written comments, if you have written comments on the project, those can be submitted to the board anytime. The board did describe the format that it wants us to follow this evening in the order that it released on December 19th of last year, and the format is as follows. We'll start with a brief summary presentation describing the proposed project by the petitioner, and the board is holding that to a 10-minute maximum unless people here want to hear more. That'll be up to you folks. Then we'll move to questions from folks in attendance tonight. And the petitioner will do its best to answer them. And what the board asked was that questions should be geared to understanding the details of the proposed project and its potential impacts under the criteria of 30 VSA section 248, which is the statute under which the board must review the proposal. Now I know that there are people here that are not familiar with that statute, obviously, and you may have some questions about the project and you're not exactly sure where they fit in. So we're not going to be really rigid. We're going to try and figure out where people's questions fit into the process. The reason that we want to do it this way is so that there is some structure, and hopefully it will help us move through the process a little bit more efficiently, because there are a lot of people here with a lot of questions. So what we're going to do is we'll go through the individual criteria, starting with the very first one, and we'll just move through them. And some of them people may not have any questions on, and some will probably be of greater interest to people, and there will be more questions on. And we'll try to make sure everybody has a chance to get their questions answered. Lastly, at the very end, if there's time remaining, the three of us are here to take questions on people on what it means to intervene in a board proceeding, to act as a party, what your rights and responsibilities are, or also just how to participate as a non-party to follow a case and file comments on it. We will be taking periodic breaks of about 10 minutes or so, primarily so the court reporter has time to rest her fingers and crack her knuckles, probably. So if I forget to do that, I have to check with her on breaks. I have asked her to flag me down. So if you see her waving like this and I'm ignoring her, somebody wave to me and get my attention. That raises another point, which is please don't speak over each other, because if you do, the court reporter can't distinguish who's saying what, and then we won't have an accurate transcription of what's said tonight. So that means when one of you is asking a question, that the people from Swanton should not start answering it halfway through your question, and likewise when they're answering a question, they should not be interrupted with a follow-up question until they finish their answer. And it's inevitable that it's going to happen a few times here and there, but if we could all just try to be conscientious about that, that would be very helpful. Let's see. Also, I think this kind of goes without saying, please try not to ask repeat questions if they've already been asked. If somebody has asked a question that you were interested in asking and you got an answer that you felt like was a complete answer, then we should probably move on to make sure that we get through everybody. That said, if somebody asked a question that was similar to something that you were interested in asking and you don't think that the answer clarified what your question was, then please obviously feel free to raise your hand and ask a follow-up or clarifying question. We do have to leave the room by 10 p.m. and myself, Greg, and Mary Jo have to clean the room up and pack everything up and be out of here by 10 p.m. So we are going to try to wind down, somewhere like 9:30 or 9:40 with the questions and answers. And that said, if anybody, when they're getting up to leave, if they want to fold their chair and put it in one of the rolling racks back there, I would give you a big pat on the back for that and say thank you. So any questions before we begin? Yes.
I guess I would just request that folks identify themselves.
Oh.
And also, if we could, I would ask the hearing officer, there are many people here who are not from any of the 10-mile towns and not from Swanton or Fairfield. And I would just ask if you could have the folks actually from the communities that are impacted by the project have preference in terms of the questions, and save folks who are from out of town till the end.
Well, with respect to her first comment, yes, if people could please, when you come up to ask your questions, start off by stating your name and spelling it for the court reporter. That way we'll have a record of everybody who spoke tonight. Normally at the public hearing type of event that I mentioned earlier, we do sign-up sheets, and we use the sign-up sheet to determine what order people will speak in. But this evening, because we're actually going to kind of try to go through the statute piece by piece, that's really going to determine the order that people are going to speak in, because I don't know what topics people have questions on, so it's very important that you identify yourself. With respect to the second request, I think at this point, I'm just going to say it's 10 after 5. We have the room for several hours, and if we're moving along efficiently, I don't see the need to do that. But if we do start to look like we're going to run out of time, then maybe we'll have to focus on that issue again. Yes, Mr. Doody.
If we do that, maybe we would apply that to the Swanton wind presenters too. If we're going to apply a geography litmus test or something, so just as a consideration.
Well, I think that the difference there is that if we apply that litmus test to some of the Swanton wind presenters, then some people are not going to get their questions answered. So, we'll just see how it goes, and hopefully we'll move along quickly and efficiently. So I'm going to ask people to be considerate of each other when trying to decide who's going to speak first. The first criterion is what's called orderly development of the region. Yes, Ms. Cadwell?
Weren't we supposed to do it for?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, my apologies. Brief presentation by the petitioner.
Thank you. My name is Leslie Cadwell. I'm counsel for Swanton Wind. This is my colleague, Allison Overy-Stone. The presentation that you'll hear is from Marcus Daskis, who's been working as a project manager from the Vermont Environmental Research Associates, also known as Bureau.
This is totally glitter store. Look at this, this whole glitter store.
I'm better standing up here because may want to point to some of these.
Folks, if you can't hear, sorry, Ms. Daskis, but if you can't hear Ms. Daskis well enough, let her know, and she can either speak up, or we can bring this stand-up microphone over for her.
Okay. First and foremost, thank you to the Public Service Board, to the town of Swanton, and the local communities, and all of you folks that have come out to learn some information about the project. We appreciate your time, and so we hope we can be as efficient with our answers as possible. I'm going to describe what the basic components of the project are. As many of you know, a petition has been filed with the Public Service Board. All of the studies that have fed into the design and addressing criteria of the project are available on the board's website. So you can see the studies, you can see the pre-filed testimony that the experts have submitted presenting their assessments. So all of the information for those that have we're not able to have everyone here tonight. Some of them had a conflict, but that information is available on the board's website. So sort of stepping back, the project is located in the southeast corner of Swanton. This is the boundary line of Swanton. Over to the east is Fairfield. To the south is the St. Albans town. It'll be located on approximately 265 acres, of which 36 of it will be cleared for the project. The property is currently and historically been used for commercial logging. It now has 12,000 tap maple sugaring operation on it, consistent with there's actually tap maple operations going on nearby. As I said, the project will include approximately 36 acres of clearing over the 265 acres of the Belials and a small adjacent property owner to the north. The access, so I'll come over here this is the project area. To locate you, this is Route 105, Sheldon Road, State Route 105 and Sheldon Road to the south, to the west. North is oriented this way on this map. And then to access the project, it will be off of the Rocky Ridge Road and then up to the hilltop at about 900 feet in elevation. This here is approximately 1.5 miles. We call this the crane path, is referred to in the civil engineering plans. The crane path is approximately 35 feet wide along the top during the installation. And then this is to move the crane from turbine pad to turbine pad. And then after the installation is complete, approximately 17 feet or half of it will be top dressed, mulched, seeded and mulched to grow back naturally. The access road will be approximately 20 feet wide. The interconnection of the project, so for the turbines, the electric collection line will run between, these are the turbine pads, let me try this here. They're labeled, when you get to the top of the hill, they're labeled 1, 2, 3, heading south, 4, 5, and then up to the north is 6 and 7. So if you hear us refer to 1 or T2 or T1, that's what we're referring to. The electric collection system will be underground between the turbines. At the edge of the hilltop, it will come above ground on single poles, typically what you see along the side of the road, and down to Rocky Ridge Road. And there is an existing Green Mountain Power 34 kV line that crosses and runs parallel to Route 105. It crosses Rocky Ridge Road, and it will interconnect there. The turbine pads are approximately an acre each. They're shaped a little bit differently depending upon the resource area, the lay of the land, how the turbine pad would actually, how the rotor assembly would occur. Then I wanted to just sort of go through the components of a wind turbine. Here, I'll do it right here so you get it, okay? The turbine has some typical parts, I'll call it. So this is what we call the rotor. It's 3 blades. It's a 3-blade rotor assembly, and the 3 blades attached to a hub. And then this piece on the back, on top of the tower, is called a nacelle, N-A-C-E-L-L-E. Depending upon the type of wind turbine, it could have the generator in it, or a generator, if it's a direct drive machine, is typically outside of the nacelle. The nacelle sits on top of the tower. A tower is typically shipped in 3, 4, 5 sections, depending upon the height of it. And then there is a base. And so the controls of the wind turbine, individual wind turbines, are typically housed inside the base of the turbine. There's a lift that can take equipment, or the technicians can either climb a ladder, or sometimes there's a lift. It again depends on the manufacturer. This is my layman's terms, but I would say there's many different types of wind turbines. They're like models of cars. So there's manufacturers of cars, and in each manufacturer, Ford, Chevy, they have different models. The same thing is true with wind turbines. There's different manufacturers, and within each manufacturer, they have different models. So when you see our information talking about what turbine and how big and how this and how that, what we've done is we have tried to anticipate the largest, or whatever the criteria is for that particular scenario, resource assessment. So for example, we have applied to the FAA and received determinations of no hazard for wind turbines up to 499 feet. That 499-foot height is when the turbine blade is in its highest position. All right? And then we have different rotor sizes, which means different blade lengths. And different manufacturers make different rotors, or different blade lengths, and different manufacturers make different tower heights to work with that wind turbine rotor. So we talk about the longest tower is probably up to 69 meters. And then that would make, and then I said, my testimony, I think I said the largest rotor would be 116 meters. So I think that's what it's 116. Where's Ryan? 116, right? Yeah. So if it's 116, the tower may be shorter, so that the combination between the tower and the rotor, or the blade length, will not exceed 499 feet. Does that all make sense? Did I do that?
No.
Okay, sorry.
The maximum height of the tower would be 69 meters. Is that, did I do
No.
that correctly?
Excuse me, could I have your name first, please?
Of course, I'm sorry. I'm Glenn Gerwit, G-U-R-W-I-T,
Thank
from
you.
Swanton.
When the entire turbine will be no taller than 499 feet. Okay?
With the blade pointing straight out.
Right, just like this, okay? And so depending upon the turbine manufacturer, the model, the combination of this blade length and this tower section will not exceed 499 feet.
I got that, but I thought you said the maximum height of the tower itself would be 69 meters.
Okay, it could be up to 69, and then the rotor would be shorter. Or we could do a 90-meter tower and a longer blade. You see, it's a mix and match.
I do, so if we have a 69-meter tower, that's about 3 feet per meter, which is about
300.
210 feet for the tower. And if you're holding in your hand, I can't imagine 250 more feet of a blade to make 499. I don't know if anybody else can see what's not fitting together like I do.
Martha said 69 meters.
I said 69, oh, I apologize, 96, I
Oh,
apologize,
I
thank you.
thought you said 69.
I'm sorry, thank you for the correction.
Martha,
Okay,
could I just
yes,
get
sir.
Ms.
clarification?
Vasquez, I just wanted to check
Oh,
in.
my time's up?
Yeah, you've gone a little bit over 10 minutes, but if people in the room generally feel that it's informative for her to keep going, then that's fine by me. Well, I'm seeing a variety. Let's see a show of hands. Who wants to move to questions? And who wants to allow the presentation to continue? Okay, it looks like we're going to move to questions.
Okay, thank
Okay. So the first...
Oh, can I at least introduce the rest of the experts?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. So I was going to conclude with, if you guys will stand up so we can make sure you have everything. We have brought with us tonight several of the resource experts. We have Dory Barton from Arrowwood Environmental, who's going to speak about the natural resources. We have John Zimmerman with Vermont Environmental Research. He's my business partner. We have Ian Jukes, Scott Holt, and Greg Dixon, if you'll raise your hands, from Krebs and Lansing. They did the civil engineering work. Oh, Ryan Darlow is with our shop. Craig Heindel is with Heindel and Noyes and is helping on the water assessment. And Ken Kaliski, who's with RSG Engineering and has done the sound work. We also have, thank you, Ashley Belisle, who is the owner of the project. And Ashley, you want to say one?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone once again, especially the board, for putting this on. The proposed project, as everybody knows, is in our backyard, and we really hope to be able to provide a contribution to Vermont's clean energy future. So thank you.
Okay, and just a reminder, I thought it was me that was chiming, but I don't think it is. Somebody out there's chiming a bit, so if folks could just put your phones on vibrate and devices on quiet, things like that, that would be helpful. Okay, so the first topic is orderly development of the region, and the question is, will a project like this unduly interfere with orderly development of the region? So if folks who have questions that they think fall under that particular topic, you want to just raise your hands and we'll see if we can move through them. Yes, sir. And if you want to come up and use the microphone, that's fine too, so everyone can hear you.
This is more informational. My name is Ron Kilburn. I'm from Swanton. I'm also a camper up on Fairfield Pond. Should we all understand that turbines number 6 and 7 are going to be on land not owned by the applicant?
That would be a question for the applicant. They're the folks that are here to answer questions tonight, sir.
Can't answer it?
I personally can. I'm not with the applicant.
Yes. Your answer is yes.
Would that be the Borvo property?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. I need my list to make sure we go in the right order.
Excuse me. Is noise part of orderly development?
Generally, noise would come, excuse me. Generally, that topic would be handled under what's referred to as criterion B5, and under, for example, public health and safety is generally, and there's also air pollution is under B5. So, yes, Mrs. Lee.
I have a follow-up question about.
Could you stand up and state your name for the court reporter?
I have a follow-up question. How many turbines are on the Borvo property and how many turbines are on the Belisle property?
2 turbines are on the Borvo property and 5 turbines are proposed on the Belisle property.
Okay, the next topic is the need for the project. Do we have any folks that have questions related to the need for the project? And this topic basically deals with, is there a need that the power generated by this project would meet that could not be otherwise met through things like energy efficiency and demand side management? comments. Yes, sir?
Yes, my name is Chris Leach. I'm a village resident. I'm also a village trustee. And of course, we have our 20 megawatt, we have our 10 megawatt hydro dam in Highgate. It would appear to me that Vermont uses the least amount of electricity of all 50 states. It also, checked the internet today, we also, per household, we use the least amount of electricity. So Vermont is extremely frugal and efficient for their electricity. Every time Swanton is able to produce approximately on average 80% of our power, we have to buy 20%. And it is our experience that there's plenty of electricity out there. And when we go to the ISO New England, the 6 states, that's Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, when we go into that market, the prices are as low as they've ever been. And even when Vermont Yankee was closed, that several hundred megawatts of power didn't affect anything. And it would appear to me that Vermont, being a low user, relatively small state, very low wholesale prices for buying electricity, there's a lot of competition out there, that tells me that there's no need for an additional 20 megawatts in the Vermont theater. Do you have comments on that?
I guess I would just refer to the testimony of John Zimmerman on the need for the project. The goal is to provide renewable power, both if possible for Vermont or for New England. John, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I do agree that the prices are at the moment, in particular a year ago, as low as we've been in some time. But the need for renewable power in New England as a whole, in the ISO electric grid, and in this state alone, if we're going to meet our energy planning goals that the state has adopted, and other states have, we're going to need more renewable power. And we are talking to people who are interested in purchasing it at rates that will make the project viable. And I guess if you just think about it, if we didn't have anybody interested in purchasing it, it wouldn't be a need, but we do.
Now, Vermont, our rates are the 5th most expensive of all the states, and yet we use the least power, and we're the most frugal with it.
I don't much more to that.
Thank you.
Just before we go to the next question, I just want to point out, I think, sir, I appreciate your observations, but we're kind of floating into the area of public comment as opposed to asking direct questions of the developer, which is fine if we keep moving on. I would certainly encourage you to submit your comments and your observations to the board or come to the public hearing when it occurs in July and make them again. But we're also not, as I said, we're not here to be cross-examining these folks. So what they're really here to do is basically answer you and tell you what they have put forth about the project. And we shouldn't be spending time basically challenging their assertions. It's for you to learn what their position is with respect to the project. There's going to be discovery, there's going to be opportunities for people to file testimony to rebut their testimony, and then at the hearing people can cross-examine to their heart's content, generally speaking. So, actually, before we come over here, there are 2 people back and towards the center. Yes, sir?
My name is Danny Bilodeau. I live in the town of Swanton, and I'm also on the select board. And I'm going to go against your last statement a little bit, because the question that you brought forth was the need, okay? And the select board has already sent letters to several boards and the governor in opposition for this project. So back to your statement as a need. All of what Chris was just saying, different power companies in the state of Vermont have already stated they don't need this. And now I'm learning at our last meeting or so that the developer's talking about selling the product being produced on that bridge to Connecticut. So where's the need for the state of Vermont?
Right, and the point for tonight, we're not here to judge the project
I
tonight.
understand.
We're just here to try and sort of mentor this along. And the point for tonight is to, if you don't understand what their position on need is to give you an opportunity to ask them to clarify what their position is, so that if you do intervene in the project and oppose it as a party, or if you just want to file comments with the board, you have a clearer understanding of what their position is, which will allow you to better articulate your position. Okay?
So, do I go further with this statement now or question now?
Well, if you have a question for them, then absolutely.
The question is, I understand Governor Shumlin's ambitious need of 90% by, what, 2050? Renewable energy in the state of Vermont. And we are not against renewable energy, speaking on behalf of the select board. But is it the right thing for our community to destroy our ridge lines, public quality of life, water quality, all that stuff? So I'd ask Travis to answer on that. If we're going to do something to our community that's going to be then a total devastation. You go to the lake, you'll see these things. Fairfield Pond, you'll see these things. And it's not benefiting anybody in the state of Vermont. Is that true, Travis?
Well, I'm going to actually ask, this is, you've asked us not to get argumentative. We've stated the need of the project. Travis is not the witness on that particular criterion, and I think John has already answered the question.
I have to agree with Ms. Cadwell on this. Tonight is not about debating, and it's not about cross-examining. It's about asking questions so you can gather more information, as opposed to, what we're getting into here is a debate about whether the project is needed, not asking questions to get an understanding of what the developer's position is on need. And there will be opportunities to have those debates. It's just that tonight was set up for something a little bit different than what we normally do in terms of a public hearing. And there will be a public hearing, and all of these kinds of statements are absolutely welcome at the public hearing and appreciated by the board.
Thank you for letting me speak.
And may I just follow up? And I do understand the town has been very clear in communicating its position. It's represented by council, it's a party. You will have an opportunity, even yourself, to provide testimony, to present your case. And that's really what I'm trying to get at. This really is for folks who haven't necessarily taken a position yet to get more information.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Sandy Steele Kilburn, and my question is, so then is the need, is some of this going to be sold to Swanton, or will it all be going out of state?
Well, right now, what's pending is a request to actually sell the power to all of the state's utilities under a state-sponsored program. There is a request from Connecticut for the renewable energy component, the RECs that are associated with that, but not the energy as I understand it. And the state contract that we've asked the Public Service Board to approve does not include necessarily the renewable components. We hope through the process that the energy and the renewable components will be sold together, hopefully within the state of Vermont. That would be the ideal situation, at least from the project's perspective. But right now, the plan is to have a contract with all of the state's utilities. I believe Swanton does take a portion of that based on its pro rata share of the Vermont electric load under the Rule 4.100 program. So I think the answer is yes, but maybe not. We're not sure.
So has there been any request from Vermont to buy any of this energy?
There is actually a federal program that requires the utilities to buy it. There is no pending request that we have, as far as I know. Is that right, John?
There's no formal request. We are always talking to Vermont utilities.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, in the back.
So just for my
Your name,
clarification,
please?
I'm sorry, Fred Parks.
So just for my clarification, there's no request from a state utility to have this power. They're required to have this power.
Yes, it's a federal law from 1978, correct.
I think I saw someone over here first. Yes.
Your name?
Name?
Oh, Ron Holland. In the first sentence for this topic, they use the adjective cost-effective. You know, it has to be the most cost-effective option available at each time. What is the effect that you say is most cost-effective? What is the effect we're talking about? Are we talking about carbon reduction? Are we talking about electron generation? What is the effect that you're saying this is the best project?
The cost-effective measures that we use are the ones that are specified in Rule 4100 that Leslie just talked about, and that is at the utilities avoided costs. That is, those costs that would be avoided had it
No,
not
no,
been
I'm asking about the effect, not the cost. What is the effect that you're talking about? It requires, you know, this is a sophisticated economic term which requires a definition. What is your definition of the effect that we're talking about?
I actually disagree with you, Mr. Holland. I don't agree with the premise of your question. I actually think that John's testimony addresses the need criterion in the way, according to Public Service Board precedent. So the analysis that you're actually asking for isn't necessary. But thank you very much for asking the question.
So you're saying it's in the pre-file?
Yes, it's in the pre-file testimony.
Then may I ask another, it's a related question on the same topic?
Please, please.
Okay. It says also that this has to be part of a least cost integrated plan.
No, actually, that's not true. For merchant generation projects, that's
For
not
what?
true. The integrated resource plan is a requirement for the Vermont's electric utilities. It doesn't apply to either the state's transmission utility. They have a separate least cost planning criteria, and it doesn't apply to merchant generation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The gentleman's not here, yes.
Ricky Dove. My question, maybe you explained it before I got here, but to get the power from the turbines to the grid, where were those lines, and will there be like a substation or something built, and where would that be in relationship to this project?
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, yeah.
And also, folks, as I said earlier, sir, I don't know if you're here, we're going to take periodic breaks of about 10 minutes or so. And during those breaks, folks should feel free to come on up and look at these plans. That's what they're here for. So.
There's an extra set of plans as requested too. Thank you for reminding me. There's an extra set of civil engineering plans up on this table. And then there's another plan with the civil engineers that we should probably put up here. Mr. Doe, the collection line between the turbines will be underground, along the road, in the road, under the road. When it gets to about here, it'll come above ground, be on single poles, and come down the road. And at the line, at the Green Mountain Power 34 kV line that runs just west of your house, you know, the line is that runs parallel to Route 105.
Right.
It'll interconnect right there.
Behind my house?
No. In fact,
Right
you
along
guys
Rocky
asked
Ridge,
to
right
be on
along
the,
Rocky Ridge Road.
yeah, you asked us to be on the south side, and we've had the engineers design it so that the poles are on the south side of
I
Rocky
didn't
Ridge
ask
Road.
anything.
Well, you're white.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Joel Clark, Swanton Select Board. When during this project review will we get a clear definition of the need for the power? Is it 2 megawatts, which is one tower at the smallest, you said 2 to 3 megawatts for each generator, or 21 megawatts, which is 7 towers, 3 megs each? When do we get that information so we can evaluate this project totally? And if we're talking about need, there should be a clear need. What is the need? Is it 2 or 21?
Those are two different questions.
They are.
Yeah. I think, sir, the need is, and I understand why you're putting them together. Like maybe
is
there's a
there a
need.
deficit of power right now in the state? Is it 2 megs? Is it 21 megs? That's my question.
Right. I think what he's asking is, you know, is there is there a need for the largest size that this project might be versus a need that would cap out at a smaller capacity? Is that accurate?
That's correct. Well, the definition of the project says up to 7 towers, 2 to 3 megs each. It is very hard to review the economic benefits, the damage done to the environment, et cetera, because the project isn't defined. So I need to know what the need is. Are we satisfying a need for 15 megs, so we're only going to build 5 at 3 megs each? And then everything changes in that document. I'm just asking the question because it's hard for me to look at it and evaluate it properly.
Well, quite frankly, it's hard for the project to present it because the project development takes a long time. The technology changes over the course of time, and in fact, the legislature addressed that and enables us to be able to say what the maximum of the project. So the maximum output will be up to 20 megawatts. And as I was talking about earlier, about different models, well, the different models of turbines come in 2.5 megawatts, each one, 2.5, 2.85, 2.75, 3, 3.25, they all have different sized generators. So each turbine has its own generator, and then if the project is permitted and the most economically viable turbine at the time, amongst other criteria, is, let's say, a 3 megawatt generator, then we would only need to put in 6 because we won't exceed the 20 megawatts. Does that help?
Well, it helps. I'm just wondering where the need in the state is. Are we short of power right now? That's the question. I don't think we're going into that.
Yes, sir.
If I could ask,
Your name, please?
Todd Boyer, also a resident of Swanton, I live at the base of Rocky Ridge myself. What I heard Swanton Wind's answer to, and correct me if I misunderstood, that there was not a need for more power in Vermont, but what your answer, what I heard, the need was to satisfy the state's goal of renewable energy. Is that?
No, I think you misheard. I'm sorry, you misheard. No one said that there was no need in Vermont. What they said was that a utility has not asked for the power. There is a need for power for Vermont. We all use electricity, we'll be using it into the future.
Okay, so satisfying that goal is not what you're expressing as the need for this project?
This is one of the needs for the project is for the renewable power in Vermont and in Vermont.
I saw another hand back in here. Oh, yes, sir.
Move along to Swanton. So one question that somebody asked was, where is the building for the transformers going to be? You never answered that. You only answered where the power lines are going. Where is the building going to be?
I think just to clarify, I think the gentleman in the back over here asked whether or not there would be a substation associated with the project.
No. They'll be at the point of interconnection down by the existing Green Mountain line is where the switches will be. The operation of the facility itself, there will be a small, like a Connex box or smaller, that would house the computer, and it's called the SCADA system, supervisory, help me here.
Supervisory control and data acquisition.
Thank you. Supervisory control data acquisition. Thank you. And each wind turbine has its own computer in it, and all of that information comes down to the SCADA building or Connex box, and then the project is also monitored from there.
So there's no building down by where the power lines meet?
No. No.
But there's a substation down there.
It's designed to be, help me here.
Marty, he was asking about transformers.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's transformers at the base of each turbine.
And how much noise will it emit?
Can you help me here? Can you stand up? This is Ken Kaliski.
The noise, generally they don't make much noise. Most of the sound is from the wind turbine itself, from the individual turbines. But the modeling includes the transformer sound as well.
Now, will there be a light at the transformers? At
No.
nighttime? No light.
No, this is like a, oh, let's see, where have I seen one lately? Where's the transformer? It's like what you would see outside of a commercial building. They're sort of, they're like.
A green cabinet?
A green cabinet, yeah. And it'll be right at the base of the turbine.
I'm sure a lot of other people would want to know what they
Yep.
Now, on these
That-
turbines,
Excuse me, just to add on, I would highly recommend that you look at the information in, Dave Estes is the electrical engineer, and in his testimony and in his exhibits, you'll find that information, the size of the transformer, where it'll be.
Will SCADA information be there as well? These turbines gonna carry? How many gallons?
I can't give you a specific answer because we don't have a contract for the turbine.
Roughly how much?
If you don't know,
We don't know.
if you don't know, we'll just take it.
Yeah.
And your counsel can ask us in discovery.
That's friendly.
So, I'm Sally Colopy from Fairfield Pond area. So regarding the substation or the lack of the apparent substation, so what is that giant piece of equipment with all the transformers coming into it that supplies Georgia Mountain over by Harrison's building? Is that not considered the substation for that? And those are only 4 turbines.
We're not going to answer questions about other projects.
Well, I just want a comparison. If that's considered the substation, wouldn't we need to have a substation that's at least that big? And that thing's huge. Huge.
I think this is a fair question. I think what she's saying is will that type of equipment be present at this project?
Yes, it will be similar to what's at.
Okay, so that is ginormous, everyone. If you go to Harrison, what's the name of that road?
North Road. It's
North
North
Road.
Road, it's at the Georgia Mountain Maples facility.
Yep, you go see that, and that's for 4 turbines, and it's massive. So that's what will be at the foot of Rocky Ridge. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes, sir. We're, just to keep in mind, we're trying to finish up the question of the need for the project.
Jim Hubbard, Swanton Planning Commission. 2 landowners, both active sugar bushes, pretty significant sugar bushes, finite land. And that was defined years ago by the state. We have a project, wanted to go in with 30 houses about 15 years ago. Turned down by Act 250 because it was going to destroy about 10 to 15% of the sugar bush. So what percentage of that sugar bush will be destroyed for approximately 50, 75 years for regrowth?
The project is clear, we're off track here.
Yeah, we are a little off track, but I think that this question perhaps relates back to the basic description of the
Yep.
project, so.
The project will be clearing 39 acres for the road. 36, excuse me, thank you. 36 acres for the clearing.
It's all sugar.
If you want to direct the vegetation, it's a mix, right?
It's a mix. I don't have a map of the sugaring lines to tell you.
Well,
It's not entirely sugar bush.
it's going to be where the grain area is.
If you want this on the record, I need one person speaking.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. And also, if it's something that's up here that you can identify up here, perhaps you can bring this gentleman up when we take our break and show him. And
Yeah, I guess,
does anybody have a question specific to the need criterion? If we're done with the need criterion, I think we're going to take our first 10-minute break, give the court reporter a rest, and everybody can get some water. And yes?
Shauna Ratner, Fairfield.
So with respect to the need criteria, is it the project's position that if Vermont utilities are not, in essence, required to accept the power from this project, that the fact of the project supplying power to the New England grid constitutes a legitimate response to its need?
That feels like a cross cross-examination question. And I think the testimony explains the request to provide power to Vermont utilities and to try to satisfy the need for renewable power in New England, if that's not an option.
Well, I would agree that it was effectively, a very effectively delivered cross-examination question. If I understand Ms. Ratner's question, it's just that if there is no purchase of the power in Vermont, is there another need for the project? And I think that's a fair question. She's just trying to understand what the petitioner's position on this issue is. That's all.
And I just answered it. Thanks.
Okay, anything else on need? Okay, let's take a break till just a few minutes after 6 o'clock, and restrooms for folks who don't know, they're out the door to the left. Okay, folks, you can quiet down a little bit and get ready to go. We'll take another break at about 10:07. And I got the thumbs up from the court reporter, so it's official, we should get started. I just want to say, I forgot to say it earlier, there's a stack of single-page handouts up here if people want. It's basically just a sort of a description outline of what the purpose of tonight is. And at the very end, there's a little bit of information and some website links on how to find information on how to intervene in a board proceeding or how to file a public comment on this case. So we'll just pass it around. I brought 50 copies. I'm not sure there's quite enough, so I apologize. Which is just because we have good attendance. So the next topic is system stability and reliability. We're into the world of engineering. Does anybody have any questions about that? Yes, sir.
Again, Chris Swanton Village. That's, I think we call that distributed generation. We have multiple points of generation, and this would be one of them. And they're not consistent. They don't deliver electricity exactly when you want it in the quantities that you need, which makes it very hard to control and causes the cost of it. Am I wrong?
The distributed generation is, you're generally correct about the concept of distributed generation, but what you want to do is ask these folks about system stability and reliability in this context is whether or not this project will cause problems with the energy delivery system. And if you have a specific question about that, you want to ask those folks. I'm certainly not an engineer, so I couldn't help you with that.
Well, as the power fluctuates by the amount of electricity you're generating, what determines how much you're going to put onto the grid?
So unfortunately, our electrical engineer lives in Maine and it was not able to come here tonight. I guess what I would do is refer to the testimony. We don't have an electrical engineer here, I think, that can actually answer that question. Sorry.
But the point is that we all recognize the wind blows sometimes and sometimes it doesn't.
That's correct, and this project is scheduled to interconnect at a transmission, not a distribution circuit. So if the interconnection itself will be studied by ISO New England, not by Swanton or anyone else. And that's about all I think we can say without the benefit of having David here to help us.
This project comment is not super right, but I'll tell you, Swanton, we have the hydro dam. We were asked by ISO New England to shut down one time because Georgia Mountain was putting out too much power. That hurts.
And I'm not sure whether the Swanton's dam and this line are actually going to be electrically interconnected.
They will not be.
Right.
But we sell the power to the grid and we have to buy it back, same as you guys.
I did see one other hand, I thought.
Well, that was me, but it was the similar question, Sally Colopy from Fairfield. Would Swanton Wind have to be periodically shut down to accept other power, so that, or hydro would have to be shut down to accept, Swanton Wind's power, sort of like Georgia Mountain and Lowell and stuff is currently. That was
was my question. And like I said, we don't have an electrical engineer to be able to answer that question tonight.
Yeah, unfortunately, Maine got all the snow that our city areas should have gotten apparently. So, although luckily, we didn't get so much up here, so we were all able to make it tonight. Yes?
You may not be able to answer this, but just for the record, we were told when this project was proposed that it would require upgrades to the grid in order to address the instability issues. What precisely would those upgrades be? Where would they be? What parts of them would be visible in any way? How much would they cost, and who would pay for them?
So I can answer them who would pay for them, but I can't answer anything else. Who would pay for them is the interconnecting project pays for upgrades that are required to make the transmission system accept the power. Those are the rules of the road for interconnection. Again, Dave Estie's not here, so I can't answer any of the other questions that you have.
Yes, sir.
Dennis Hendy, Fairfield, Vermont. My question is, what's the purpose of a Met Tower?
So we're not, I think we're going to start drifting again. I want to.
But isn't that kind of the engineering thing, or no?
Well, it doesn't have to do with the stability of the electric grid.
Okay.
But I'm sure we're going to find a place to fit in your question somewhere. I just want to try and stay on track so we can do things efficiently. Sir, were you raising your hand?
Me? No.
Oh, in the back? Yes, sir.
So I wanted to ask a follow-up question to your most recent answer. So you said the project would pay for the cost of, I'm going to say, getting the power to the, I think Green Mountain Power owns the lines that are there? Okay. So the project would pay the cost to get the power to Green Mountain Power's line. Are you saying that there would be no upgrade requirements, no cost associated with GMP for any line from that point forward? Are you saying that there's no cost associated for anybody else?
No, that's not what you say, but, and I can only answer it in a general term, that when the system impact study will determine what the upgrades are, and the project will pay for those upgrades, whether they're coming down the hill, well, it's new coming down the hill, but then anything on the GMP line.
So for example, if GMP needs some new piece of equipment in order to accommodate the project, GMP's ratepayers don't pay the cost of that.
No, the project.
Okay. The next topic is economic benefit to the state and its residents. So, hands? Yes, sir.
Ron Holland. What is the economic benefit of this project to the state and its residents?
You can find that information in Dick Heaps's report. Mr. Heaps was not able to make it this evening, so you'll have to refer to his testimony, which is available online, as you know.
Thank you.
You want to?
The other contribution that the project anticipates making annual contributions to the town, as well as there will be a contribution to the state education fund, which is based upon the generation of the facility, and that's paid twice annually. It'll be paid for the life of the year for the project.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Joel Clark, Select Board. I think it was later on when they talked about the section on the economics related to the town, not the separate section related to the people of the state. It seems how that's brought up now, it says $150,000 paid to the town of Swanton, is that correct?
We initiated a conversation with the town lister and the chair of the select board, and we proposed that as a sample of what has been paid at other projects throughout the state. So it's a starting point for a conversation.
Well, it says in the application, does it say $150,000 would pay to Swanton, is that correct?
It says,
Mr. Zimmerman, who provided the information, it's his testimony.
This is approximately that, and it's consistent with what Martha has said.
So that's regardless, so my question is, that's regardless of whether it's 1 tower, 2 towers, 3 towers, 4 towers, 5 towers, 6 towers, or 7 towers?
It'll depend on the value of the project and our negotiations with you.
So does it say that in the application, in your testimony? It's a question I got regarding economics to the town.
Are you
That's
asking?
the question I'm asking. Does it say in the testimony that 150,000 is on a sliding scale based on what the generation is.
No, I think what it says is that the project is proposing 7 turbines, up to 7 turbines, and the 150,000 is used as an example for the project as proposed. It sounds like you've actually read Mr. Zimmerman's
I've
testimony.
read the whole thing. It's about 7 inches. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of work. But
Thank
thanks
you
for
very
asking me a
much.
question.
Thank you very much for taking the time to do that. We do really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dan Connor, Fairfield. So just to follow on the same line of questioning as the gentleman from Swanton, has Fairfield been offered that same economic opportunity?
Fairfield isn't hosting any of the infrastructure, so I don't think that is typical to get tax revenue for infrastructure that's located in another town. So the answer is no.
But the infrastructure directly affects the town of Fairfield.
Is that a question?
Yes. Or I think it's.
No, the infrastructure is in Swanton.
It's in Swanton, but it's gonna have a pretty dramatic effect around the Fairfield pond area. Is that not correct?
I think we disagree with that, and I think that in the filings, particularly with respect to the aesthetics analysis, we don't actually think it's going to have a significant impact on Fairfield.
Of course not.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask another question regarding economic benefit?
Of course there is.
Thank you very much. So it talks, the section that the individual's not here to answer tonight talks about economic benefit to the state in terms of CO2 gas savings related to that. Is there any other criteria for the economic benefit to the state?
We think we fully addressed the criteria in our filing, and I guess I would say that question should be directed to your council.
Okay, so I guess what I'm going to ask is anybody else want to pick up my questions if they're just going to keep referring me to council and not answering the question. Thank you.
I would just like to clarify something for this room and these people on this board, as well as you guys. This is supposed to be a workshop. It was a Q&A session, and we're not getting any answers. We have lots of questions and no answers. Or if we're not, at least not getting answers, we're getting referrals. Refer to this, refer to that. We've read all the documents. We know what it says, and we can't get straight answers.
I think if certainly follow-up questions are permissible if you don't think your question has been answered. With respect to referrals, they brought an awful lot of people with them. They didn't bring everybody, so if you're getting into real details on, at least so far, the engineer and the economics gentlemen aren't here, and you're looking into real details, then they may not be able to answer them to the extent that Mr. Zimmerman and Ms. Staskis can answer in a more general manner. I think that would be helpful. And Mr. Clark, was it? I didn't understand your last question.
The question I asked was, are there other factors that are determining the economic benefit to the state?
Well,
besides, one of the key ones it talks about is the carbon gas offset or whatever. Are there other things that make up that economic benefit? That was all.
No, okay. Well, I think if unfortunately Mr. Heaps isn't here, but what the petitioner has done is they've put forth their case in pre-filed testimony that says, these are the things that we took into account, here's how we did it, we ran a model, and these are the results of our model, and this is our opinion. And if people who are interveners and participating in the case as parties think that they've missed something, then you are absolutely free to file testimony saying, hey, they didn't take this into account, they got it wrong. And then when that's the kind of factual dispute that the board is going to have to try to hash its way through and see through to the end. So You know, Mr. Heap's not being here, all I could tell you is that as far as I'm concerned, they've put forth what they think is relevant in terms of doing an analysis of economic benefit, and if you think they've got it wrong, and you have, you know, put on a witness and say that they've got it wrong, and then we'll have to figure it out from there.
Fair enough, thank you.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it, sir. Okay, let's see any more hands. So we're going to go to what's known as criterion B5, which I'll thank the legislature for doing this. It's the criterion that incorporates a whole bunch of sub-criterion from Act 250. So it can be a little confusing sometimes. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through the various things that are specifically mentioned in B5, and then we're going to go to the things that are what we call incorporated by reference into B5. And so the first topic area for this evening under B5 is public health and safety. So,
is sound covered under that?
yes, I think this would be an appropriate place to talk about sound.
I have a question.
Have your name, please?
Greg Pierce, Swanton City, Fairfield Province. I have a cold, it's not too clear, I'm going to read it so that I get it right. With respect to the document SWKHK2, pages 14 and 15, which that document was done by Mr. Kaliski, who's sitting here by me and is rifling through the paper right now. The Vermont temporary sound rule is placed on a presumptive sound attenuation during passage through the walls and windows of the domestic dwelling as being minus 15 decibels. In other words, the sound pressure level is presumed to drop by 15 decibels as the sound passes through the wall of the dwelling. In light of recent information developed through actual field testing conducted at the Paul Bruhaw residence in Sutton, Vermont, and independently validated by the Vermont Department of Public Service sound testing consultants, the actual value determined by field testing is more likely in the range of -1 to 3, a dramatically lower amount. In Mr. Kaliski's study, figure 32 on page 47, there are more than 60 homes depicted as lying inside the 35 decibel sound pressure level isoline, which has been modeled by RSG. If you subtract a more accurate presumption of 3 decibel sound attenuation during wall window passage into the 60 dwellings from the 35 decibel exterior sound pressure level, you have a 32 decibel sound pressure level in the dwelling interior. This value exceeds the 30 decibels nighttime allowable interior sound pressure level required under the Vermont temporary sound rule. Is Mr. Kaliski prepared to withdraw his information based on this new finding?
No, the test that you were talking about is really an exception. This is a house which had basically a bedroom which has a wall of windows that completely opened out into the project. And so it's really an exception. Test we did in around the Georgia Mountain Wind Community Project showed that the attenuation was 15 decibels, which is a more typical home that you have.
Did you actually do those tests?
Yes. And we base our 15 decibels on the WHO guidelines, the World Health Organization guidelines, outside and inside sound attenuation. That said, in our study, we did say that, I could read it to you, our noise threshold goal for an individual home with modeled exterior sound levels between 40 decibels and 45 decibels may be adjusted based on what can be assumed about the bedroom from outside observation. So if we receive additional information about a house or bedrooms or furnishings within a bedroom or window sizes, for example, we can decibels for an individual home based on those lines.
Do you think it would be appropriate to actually test in the area that you're proposing?
No, it's just because there are, you have 169 homes above the 30 decibel contour. So it would be inordinately expensive and intrusive to essentially test the bedrooms of 169 homes.
Did you inquire if anybody would like to volunteer to participate in such an evaluation?
I didn't personally,
Quick follow-up.
Sure.
Where and when were those tests conducted on Georgia Mountain, and is that data publicly available?
Yeah, that was conducted, I think it was the Fitzgerald residence, and it was submitted to the Public Service Board. I don't know what the docket was or anything like that, but it is publicly available.
Yes.
Can I have a follow-up question as well? I'm Paula Payne, St. Albans City, and also Fairfield County. The 169 did those include the Fairfield County camps?
The 169 homes are within the 30 decibel sound contour from the model. So it includes, you just see it includes Fairfield home camps. If a Fairfield home camp was in that sound contour, it would.
I think it was the
Confirm that. Yeah, so, I don't believe that those homes are within that 30 decibel contour, so it might be just on the edge, but it looks like the Fairfield home residences are at or below 30 decibel.
Do people know what Mr. Kaliski means when he says within or outside of the 30 decibel contour? Does he need to give a quick explanation, or does everybody understand what he's referring
I'd
to?
like an explanation.
Okay, Mr. Kaliski, if you could just give a quick explanation of what you mean by that.
Yeah, I wish I had a blow-up of it, but in the report we did a sound propagation model. So we're looking at the sound levels as you move away from the project. And just like you have a topographic contour of a certain elevation, we have sound contours of certain decibel levels. So in our report, we have colored contours that show sound levels, and you're not going to be able to see it from here. But when I say a house is outside of the 30 decibel contour or an area, that means the sound levels in that area is below 30 decibels. So you can obtain this contour map.
Can you show us on one of the larger maps?
What the contour looks like?
Yeah.
I think this is about as large as we're gonna get. Do you wanna try?
Yeah, this, since they don't have a really large one that everybody can see, maybe this is something that people who are specifically interested could chat with them during the break, so we can keep moving along with questions. Otherwise, we're going to take like 20 minutes just passing this thing around.
But I can confirm that. There's a...
Can you tell them what page in your report it is? Because it is available online, and they can get it from your report.
Yeah, and I can confirm those levels. It's, it's page 47 of the report, figure 32, but also in the back of the report, there are addresses of all the homes within 3 miles of the project and the projected sound level of each of the homes, and you can see what the sound levels are. But the sound levels around Fairfield Pond would be certainly below 35 decibels, and if you know what address you want to see, you can look at it in the back of the report.
And it begins at page 63 of the exhibit, begins the appendix that has all of the, we had him do all of the addresses so folks could easily look up and see what the projected level was of the house.
Ms. Colby?
Hi, I have one really quick yes or no question that kind of backtracks just a bit, but it's just a quick yes or no.
You know, Ms.
Wait,
Colby,
wait,
every time the lawyer says, it's just a yes or no question,
it is,
the
it
witness,
is,
the
it
witness
is.
says, but it's not a yes or no
It is.
answer.
When somebody asked,
Believe me, I've tried.
this gentleman behind me asked, in addition to the Belisles who have an invested interest in the project, they wanted to know who the other owner of the property was, and it was confirmed that it is the Burbos. But I would like to know if the prominent wind developer, David Bluesdorf, has any invested interest in this project, which is basically a yes or no. No. None. And that could be confirmed?
You did a really good job, you got a no answer.
The answer is no. And then my question thing about Fairfield Pond is, in your report, Mr. Kaliski, it was reported that many locations on Fairfield Pond registered at a DBA of 20, which is very, very low. So when somebody else asked the question, I think it was Chris Leach or Joel, if we don't know what the turbine model would be, and we only can make 20 megawatts, and so let's say they're 3 megawatts, that power output is going to be more than the 2.5 megawatt turbine, and it's a 20 decibel area. So how would you control that attenuation across water, across Fairfield Pond?
Yeah.
Which you basically, Mr. Kaliski said you eliminate that distance on Fairfield Pond at another previous meeting in this room over a year ago.
Can you answer the question about the
Yeah.
clarify the question about the turbine and the output? There's a corresponding.
Each turbine, again, like they have different size generators, they have different size rotor, they have different size tower, they also have different sound power level outputs. So the project will operate, we cannot get a turbine that is louder than what the project is able to and approved to operate at.
Yes, sir. Oh, well, actually, I think, I'm sorry.
I thought there was another question.
Yeah, Mr. Kaliski had part of that question, I'm sorry.
So, I just didn't understand what you thought I said something about sound attenuating over water, and I just wanted to know what that was and try to respond to it.
At a Swanton Wind workshop here, when many of us in the room came, and we said we were concerned about Fairfield Pond because we're downwind with prevailing winds out of the southwest on a steep slope with no coverage of any sort of trees or foliage or anything. And everyone knows how sound travels across water. And you actually admitted, you said to me, if you are 2 miles away from the project, and I think we even have it on recorded. If you are 2 miles away from the project and you have 1 mile of water in between you, you deduct that amount of water, which means you're actually 1 mile away from the project. Those were your exact words, sir.
I don't think they were my exact words, but it is true that sound propagates better over water, so you're not going to have as much loss over a body of water. And what we did in the modeling for this project is assume that the entire area around the project is hard ground, so that it's essentially it's propagating over a non-porous surface like water. So our modeling is very conservative and takes into account the hard surface of Fairfield Pond as well as the rest of the area. So the highest levels, or that the sound level at the closest home along the edge of Fairfield Pond is modeled at 32 decibels.
Okay, I have this gentleman back here, and then the gentleman over.
Steve Woodward Swanton. I have a question for him. Are your models the only ones that are being used in this project? Or is there other, I mean, are you the sole person who says, yes, this is what this noise is gonna be?
Yes, that's right. We're the only ones that provide any testimony on.
To be perfectly honest with you, I don't think anybody in this room is reassured by your testimony.
Yeah, sir, I'd just like to point out that so far, Swanton Wind is the only entity that has filed any testimony.
Or as comment, shall I say.
The other interveners, if they want to put in their own sound modeling and sound modeling results, when it comes time to file that testimony, then they're perfectly welcome to do so. So it's just, to date, that's all we have.
I think, sir, did you have a question? No, okay. I'm not sure who was next, but, okay, green shirt in the middle.
Yeah, my name is Joe Fitzsimmons, and I hear all this. I would like to know how many people have been within 100 yards of Georgia Mountain and heard Phoenix. That's what I'd like to know. I've built up there. I've built the people that live there. The deer are there. There's nothing that isn't there anymore. Disappeared because they put in roads and they do work. This kid's trying to put in a thing. Everybody's worrying about the noise and everything, but no one's ever, not even half the people have gone up there and listened to it. They see big things gonna go up and they're all worried about it, like it's gonna be something bad. But it's what it is, and this is our technology we're in. You know, fans, green, go green, oils everywhere. You know? The worst thing about everything you people should complain about is the kids doing this, driving their car, getting
That's not a
killed.
question.
I would agree with the last part of your comments, sir, but we are here to ask questions of the development, and we are going to have a public hearing later in this process where comments like that are perfectly appropriate and appreciated.
I'm worried about hearing it, they haven't even been there. So
Okay,
it
I
doesn't
appreciate
make
it.
sense.
We have to move on to questions. The gentleman in the green shirt just to your right.
Yeah. I just wondered when and how.
Your name, please, sir?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I'm John Gamsby, and I'm from St. Albans Town. And my question is when is the size of these turbines and all the other sizes of generators and everything going to be put out to the people so they can get some adequate, information on them as to what it's going to affect?
So the process that is typically going through development of a utility scale wind project is that you will do this analysis, and as I described in the beginning, we've utilized the largest rotor, the loudest turbine, whatever, for the models that are on the market. When the project has moved through and is secured a permit to actually build a project, there'll be a solicitation to what the current technology is on the market at that time, and then we will have to submit that to the Public Service Board for final approval. It'll be a condition of the permit, is that I expect that all criteria of the specific turbine, how big the generator is, what kind of a generator it is, which turbine model is, what's the sound power output, all the specifics of that will be a condition that, all that information after a turbine selector, you go through we call it a turbine solicitation, and then there's a turbine supply agreement created, but as you can imagine, that's a significant cost of the project. And so until you know that the project is going to be built, you can't sign to buy a turbine.
So you just plan for the biggest?
Right.
Biggest and worst. Thank you.
Yes, I believe we're next, sir.
Hi, Fred Hart. My question is kind of a follow-up for Whiskey, is it?
Yes.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, you are also, have you been the sound engineer, if you will, for other Vermont industrial wind turbine development?
Yes.
And so, after, and needless to say, prior to those projects going in, all of your sound modeling was done based upon modeling results, et cetera, that you basically have referenced here. Has there been I'm gonna call real life in the field testing after those developments went in to determine the accuracy of what's really being measured day to day versus what those models showed through your analysis? And if so, do you have an appreciation for the quantitative, or I should say qualitative analysis of the accuracy that those models performed at?
Yes, and in part we discussed that in clear, but so for all projects in Vermont and there have been post-construction sound monitoring done. So for Kingdom Community Wing, for example, it was 2 weeks of monitoring for 8 seasons over 2 years. For Georgia and Mountain Community Wind, it was monitoring that was done over 4 seasons over a year.
It's a little hard to hear you over here.
Oh, I'm sorry. But we also did a research study for the state of Massachusetts and looked at many hours of sound monitoring data versus sound modeling data. And the modeling parameters that we use here are conservative. That means they tend to overestimate the actual sound levels that we actually find in the field.
So as a result of your answer, I believe, or if I'm wrong, I believe there have been post-construction complaints brought forth to, I think, the Department of Public Service, I think that's or the PSB, by those who actually live near some of those developments, who have had independent sound studies done, where they have shown that they believe those noise levels are higher than what your modeling would have previously shown. And based upon your answer, you would suggest that those in the field and noise measurements that were taken were false. Not valid.
I don't know what you're referring to, so I don't know. I haven't seen those studies.
Have you referred to any sound complaints brought before the board that would have been done by independent field study and analysis versus the modeling that you would have done, that you said was conservative?
Yeah, certainly there have been complaints to the Public Service Board, but those complaints don't necessarily mean there have been violations of the sound standard. There were,
but they could be.
There were violations of the Kingdom Community Wind project, but those related to icing or snow, rimy snow events that were subsequently dealt with. So I don't know of any other studies that have shown violations of sound standard in Vermont.
Thank you.
Mr. Ruby, you've been patiently raising your hand, and we'll get to you, ma'am, right after Mr. Ruby.
Thank you, Ken. These questions, I'm going to try to keep them really quick, and they're from your report. So, kind of getting to Fred's question, my name is Brian from in response to noise complaints at Georgia Mountain Community Wind, the Public Service Department has hired experts who stated in a memo dated 8 August 2016, quote, noise levels in exceedance of 40 dBA and occasionally above 45 dBA were likely. And that, quote, as the turbines age, they get noisier. This was for a home at 3,800 feet with 4 turbines. How can you explain your modeling that predicts Swanton wind will be below 45 dBA for 7 turbines with turbines twice as close as 1,800 feet?
So the modeling takes into account the sound power of the individual turbines, so how much sound each turbine generates, the distance, the topography, and based on those combination of those parameters, you calculate what the sound level would be at the homes for the highest 1 hour.
Okay, thank you. On page 44, footnote 15, it kind of gets to, in Georgia Mountain Community Wind in Saddleback, Maine, you had a note that, quote, harder ground generally increases and softer ground generally decreases the sound level. You don't have that in the Swanton Wind, and obviously this is Rocky Ridge, so it's obviously hard ground. But you have a very detailed footnote 15. I don't think I need to read it, but I would like you to explain that footnote
and it goes to this approximately, this is approximately equivalent to using ground factor of 0.5 and adding in 2BD uncertainty. This is the most conservative set of inputs appropriate for this facility. Question is this a valid assumption?
What page is that? I'm
It's
sorry.
on page 40,
Thanks.
44, page 44.
So there's a footnote on page 44? What footnote? No.
Yeah, and sound experts asked me to ask this question just for the record of, as it relates to hard ground and Rocky Ridge.
Page 39?
We put this page.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
The
Sorry
top.
about that.
In the actual document, it's right there, maybe it's a page before that. I can read it for you if you like.
There's an exhibit page number and there's a
Report page.
report
Yeah,
page.
footnote 15.
Okay. Okay, so the question is,
I just was looking for an explanation of, it's,
What it means.
you've already stated about hard ground
Yeah.
is attenuates less. And the question is, the explanation of a factor for your model of 0.5, and then you add in a 2BD, 2 decibel uncertainty. I was curious to the methodology.
okay, so the ground hardness affects how sound propagates, or how much sound propagates. So very soft ground, sound is generally absorbed by the ground. Very hard ground, sound is reflected by the ground and essentially propagates further, is louder further away. So in the modeling we do, we can set the ground hardness to be a very porous ground, which is a ground factor of 1, or a very hard ground, which is a ground factor of 0, or a mixed ground. So 50% hard, 50% porous would be a ground factor of 5. So when we say, in the footnote it says that the ground factor of 0.5 is, if you add that 2 decibels, you get essentially the same answer as you would if you used a ground factor of 0.
Okay. Page 48, table 6. I'd like you to comment on the attenuation below and above 100 hertz. Below 100 hertz, I'd like to know what your attenuation model was, and above 100 hertz. And this is as it relates to tonality from the Goldwyn 109.
What the attenuation is?
Yeah, what attenuation factor you've used for the distance from the turbine?
Yeah, so we're using the ISO 9613-2 methodology, which is an international standard for outdoor sound propagation. And we're using spectral ground absorption, and I have to go into the model to see what the attenuation was at the different frequencies. So I don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay.
But it would be following that standard.
Okay. Okay. The comprehensive energy plan says that we need to learn from past projects. I'd like to follow up with Greg's question. The fact that we've done actual testing on attenuation in the Paul Bruja that showed 1 to 3 dB attenuation, you don't think that would cause any questioning of attenuation for a project that is so, where a 45 dB is within at least a couple hundred feet of the homes in Rocky Ridge? You're confident that there would be no risk for the developer and for the investment being made in this project to exceed the 45 dB with the proximity of that 45 line?
No, it's not part of my testimony, what the risk is to the developer, but I did say in the report that if we get any further information specific to the individual home, we could modify the noise goal for that home.
Yeah, that's a very fair comment back. My more concern with for the people who live there. I think that covers it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Before we move to the, you will be the next questioner, man. But before we move to it, there's been a couple of questions that have referenced Mr. Bruja, and then there was a couple about Georgia Mountain. And, I mean, so far I haven't heard anything that gives me concern, but there are complaints pending before the board. There are open cases. And so we really can't get into sort of debating the finer points of those cases here tonight. We're not here to try them, and the three of us can't talk about them at all because they are pending before the board. It would be like going into a court and asking the judge to tell you what's going on in a case that's ongoing. So it's, you know, if we keep it a general discussion and these folks can answer it, that's fine. But I just want people to be aware of that if I do chime up at some point because I'm getting concerned. That's the reason. I'm not trying to cut people off. I'm just trying to make sure we don't make any mistakes here tonight. So, yes, ma'am, your turn.
Thank you. Mary Bushy, resident town of Swanton and also Fairfield Pond. And my question is, how did you choose the 3,000 feet for a property buyout? How did you come about that figure?
Okay. It wasn't scientific. It looked like a reasonable distance, but we, as I think have stated directly to the Department of Public Service that invited us to consider offering that. If that's not sufficient, I think Travis and Ashley would be willing to consider something that makes, that makes sense.
It was put out as a starting point for a conversation, that the Belisles have recognized and heard concerns expressed by neighbors nearby. They live right there too, and they wanted to come up with a proposal. And so it's a proposal that is, we'd love to hear your suggestions.
So if someone lived a little further than that,
well, we're not talking 5 miles. I mean,
no,
okay. Yeah.
3,500.
There you go. Okay.
Something like that. And how many homes do you think it would include that at 3,000?
Right now, just a buffer around the project of 3,000 feet looks about like 20 homes, and there's some right on the edge, so we're not, we're not looking at making this hard, fast line.
And how do the people know if they're within that area? Did you send them letters or?
Well, no. Okay. So the proposal has been submitted as part of the petition, and I'm sorry, I just made the assumption you could go on Google Earth and you can see maps there's maps in the testimony. We've had buffers around different things. I'd be happy to find your house and tell you how far away you are.
Okay. Yeah, in Ken Polisky's report, you can actually find.
Oh, we did the.
Right.
Thank you.
I don't know how far out that goes. I think it goes out farther than 3,000 feet.
I bet it's 3 miles. Yes.
So you can actually look to see, it has both the E911 address and it has the distance from the project. It should have the distance from the project. We try to do both, plus the sound level.
So I think there's.
This
gentleman's been trying to.
Yeah, there was a gentleman back over here somewhere that's been trying to.
Yeah.
Be me. I'm Mark Doobie. I'm probably the biggest abutter to this project. Travis and I share a border for 9,000 feet. I brought a little visual aid. That's our sugar woods. I got a sound question, sir. The Swanton zoning says the maximum decibel levels at a property line should be 35 dBA. We are going to be working, oh, by the way, 2 of these turbines are less than 100 feet from our property line. That's a little close. So 2 of these turbines are less than 100 feet from my property line. Me and my team, my wife, brother, we're going to be working there hours and hours at a time. I think your scenario says we're into a dBA. So my question is, should I have my guys get ear tested now? Because we are going to be working in this sound zone hours and hours at a time. Travis, as a sugar, you know some of our business is done by audible leak detection. A lot of it's site leak detection. But this project, because of the sound levels, it's going to be like a chainsaw running, might not be a chainsaw, vacuum cleaner, whatever you want to call it. But my business is going to be affected because it is going to affect the way I collect my sap. So my question is, I'd like to see you move your turbines down a little bit, Hill. Why should I be affected by noise? I suggest you move the turbines down and get me into a 35 dBA for a safe work zone. That was a question.
It was a question?
Yeah.
What was the question?
Yeah.
About having
I would like to
your
see you
folks
move
get
your
ear tested and
Yeah, should I have my employees ear tested now? And how far downhill do you have to move your turbines to now make my work zone safe again for my guys with hearing loss?
so,
How far downhill do you have to move your turbines?
we're not moving the turbines down.
Oh, you're not? Boy, that's a quick answer.
Um,
You're not moving them downhill.
And
How about
and I don't,
Folks, you can't talk over each other, and let's
Okay.
please try to be polite to each other also.
do you want to address the 55 and the sound that's up on the ridge?
Yes, so the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, threshold for putting somebody into a hearing test program is 85 decibels. So 55 is well below that. So give you a sense of what 55 is, it's about my speaking voice right now.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to just do a couple more questions and then give the court reporter a break. Ms. Colby, we'll get back to you. You've asked quite a few, and they've all been good, but I want to see some people who we haven't. Yes, ma'am, back in the corner.
Hi, my name is Danielle Barron and Swanton. I'm obviously very concerned over the health issues that could be posed for my family. Not just the sound, obviously that's one of them, but I'm sure you're all aware of infrasound, the sound, the ice rows, all that stuff. But now coming here, I have an extra concern, and that is the power lines. The power lines that you guys are talking about are about, one of them is 100, 150 feet away from our home. We are all, from what I know, if I'm right. Am I right with that? Does anybody know? Travis?
Yeah, I would say that's
Okay.
fair to say.
So that one line is right there, like 100 feet from my home. And it's already a little bit, I already get a little bit nervous with the amount of power that goes through there next to my home. Can you explain to me how more power will affect those lines 100 feet from my home?
We're not going to change those lines.
I know they're there, but the power going through them is changing, correct?
No, it's a 34 kilovolt line.
So it's not going to be increased. So what's changing? It's just the different power?
Well, that's the largest that line can carry, and so the line it has less than that now.
Right now. Okay. So it's going to get to its maximum capacity.
Well, I don't know if it's going to get to the maximum, but it's going to be added to it.
Right. And does anybody here know about the health risks of that?
I don't think we have anyone here to answer that, but I can certainly get you information about electromagnetic emissions from high voltage power lines. Velco has some of that information available, I believe, on its website. And if you want to come see me after a break, I can direct you to the information that you need in order to understand the risks associated with power lines.
Okay, now let's just say there are risks, because more than likely, 100 feet away from such high power voltage, there will be a risk. So let's say there's a risk. So then what? So I learn about it, but what good does that do me?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll inform you that that you don't have actually reason to be concerned about your health for living near a 34/5 electric line. And Green Mountain Power may be able to answer the questions as well.
Actually, I called them before I built the house because I was concerned about the amount, and they couldn't. So.
It's their line.
That's
Right,
something
well,
that you folks might be interested in knowing.
So that brings me to my second question. I spoke about the concerns, and obviously there's a plethora of them. So at a select board meeting a while back, when I spoke with Chris Rakia, I asked him if he could guarantee me that there would be no harmful effects from the wind turbines to my family. And he said no, that he could not guarantee me that there was no harmful effects. I'm wondering what you guys would say to that. Can you guarantee me that my family will not be negatively affected by these turbines?
No, we're not going to give you any guarantees. And I speak only as counsel. I would not let my client give you a guarantee here tonight. Either way, what we have to do is demonstrate to the Public Service Board through our pre-filed evidence, and you are welcome to intervene and present your concerns and your evidence to demonstrate to the board that the project will be safe for those who live around it. Travis and Ashley have proposed a project right in their backyard, and I think they're confident. But as counsel, and if you had a lawyer too, I think they would probably tell you, don't ever guarantee anybody anything. It's just a lawyer thing.
Okay, what's the possibility that I could be, and my family could be negatively affected? Not a guarantee, but, I mean, this is a huge project. These are things that you must kind of know ahead of time.
The evidence that we've put on says that we don't believe that the project has an undue adverse impact on public health and safety. So you may disagree with that, and as Mr. Cotter said, you're welcome to participate in the case and bring forward the information that you have to help inform the board and the project. If there's information that we haven't taken into account, we certainly want to hear it.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to give the court reporter a quick break until we'll start again at 10 after 7. And I know we haven't quite gotten through this topic, but the court reporter's fingers need a break, so we'll return to it at 10 after 7. Thanks.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. We'll see. I agree. We'll see, though. All his buddies are invested in that. Chitak, you know, man.
Okay, folks, please get started. And I just want to make an observation. What I'm trying to do here tonight is strike a good balance between trying to be efficient, but also letting people have plenty of time to get their questions answered. I do want to point out that we have not made an enormous amount of progress on the criteria list. So if folks could stay on topic and stay focused, that would be great, because it would really be a great idea if we could finish all of the different subject areas tonight. So we're...
There's a ton more on safety.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say we're staying on public health and safety for now. Hopefully some of the latter criteria. I know there's going to be some controversial ones coming up, but hopefully some of them won't be as of such important interest to people, and we'll move through those more quickly. So, Mr. Doobie, you have your hand up for a while.
So we received a petition, we had a chance to read the petition. So this is one of the exhibits in your petition. This is the proper orientation of the project. As Mark said, our Sugar Woods abuts your project.
And the blue shading, for those who haven't read the petition, dark blue means the petition reads that each turbine could generate 2.2 ice balls and could be thrown maximum 1,050 feet. That's what the petition says. So I'd like to just ask a couple of questions, like 4 questions. Your plan shows several turbines within 50 feet of our boundary, and your petitions say that if the turbines fail, that the spinning blades could be thrown as much as 1,500 feet. I'm asking you if you would move your turbines back 1,500 feet from the boundary.
So I think Mr. Darius Shvagani is not here. I don't think that you actually characterized his report correctly. And I think the answer to the question is no.
Okay. So the petition is, I want to be really accurate with what you said in the petition, so if I've misrepresented, that's not my intention. Your petition says that if the turbines fail, that they could throw their blades 1,500 feet. So that's, I don't want to argue that point.
No, but finish the statement in terms of the probability of that
Oh,
happening.
that's true. The probability, there's low probability.
Okay.
So I'm asking you, would you say, you say no, okay. Next question. Your petition says that the turbines could throw 2.2 ice balls up to 1,000 feet. I'm asking you if you would consider moving your turbines back from the boundary 1,000 feet.
So again, I don't think you're characterizing Mr. Fagani's testimony or his report, and I would defer the questions about his testimony and his report to Mr. Fagani if he were here, and unfortunately he's not. So
Okay, I'll say it again.
what I would ask and invite you, you've been very active, and we really appreciate the interest that you've shown in the project. We hope that you will intervene, and we'll have an opportunity to address some of those questions to Mr. Fagani, who really does have the expertise to explain a little bit better the probabilities that he discusses in his report.
Okay.
I think for today, the project has not had a request before now to move the turbines. So I'm answering on behalf of the project to say no. If you want to provide us with some information for folks to consider, not right here on the spot, we would welcome that. So if you were going to continue to ask whether we're going to move the turbines, I'm just going to tell you that the answer to all those questions tonight is going to be no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
That's helpful, thank you. Your petition says that you are going to place warning danger high voltage generation signs 580 feet from the boundary. Are you expecting to place those signs on our land?
No.
Okay, so you won't do what you say in the winter operating
We
procedure?
would put it on the property boundary.
Okay, the property boundary, as I show, is 50 feet. The blades will be within 50 feet of at least 2. Okay, that's an answer, thanks. Your petition says that you are going to close your access road during icing conditions. It says this in a winter operating protocol. Are you proposing to close our access road that we've had for 10 years on our Sugar Woods?
Are you the landowner or the land lessee?
I'm speaking for my brother. I'm a co-founder of our Sugar Woods.
Yeah, I just
Yes,
asked.
I am the land owner.
Thank you.
Mark, would you?
So I'm sorry.
So are you proposing for us to close our access road?
No.
No. Okay. So you close yours, but you're not suggesting your
No, and I
petition.
think that the,
Okay, that's fine. This is all for the record. That's helpful. Your petition says that you're going to send out text messages to neighbors during icing conditions as a safety precaution. That's a quote. I'm asking you if you will move your turbines away from the boundary so that my brother and I will not have to get a text message to say out of our Sugar Woods when my brother and I and our family and our 5 employees need to work to maintain the 200 miles of pipeline in our woods.
So I already answered, I already told you we're not moving the wind turbine.
Okay. So when we get the text message, a text message that we should stay out of our woods because it's icing conditions, that's the expectation that you would place on
So, again, I would say that the petition has been filed with a proposal for a winter operating protocol, and this is the first opportunity that you and I have had a conversation about this winter operating protocol, and we would love to work through the details.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. The woman right back here. I'm going to get to you, Ms. Scalaby, I promise. I just want to let some other people have a shot at it.
My name is Patty Greenville, and I have a follow-up question for Mrs. Guerin's question about the safety of her family. And I heard you say no, that when she asked you a direct question, you said no. So my follow-up question is, if it turns out that you're wrong with your model, because I've come from a model world and I know that models are that, or models, will you take any responsibility with what happens to this family, or any of the others as far as that goes?
Could you be more specific? Which model you were talking about?
I think the sound model. The sound model.
I'm sorry?
Are you talking about the sound model?
She was talking about the sound, she was talking about the
electromotive force
the electricity part. She was talking about her family being impacted adversely, and you said that your model said that they wouldn't be. And my question as a follow-up to hers is, if it turns out that you're wrong, will you be responsible in any way for her family?
I don't really fully understand what you mean with responsible. I think if there are...
It's a pretty easy word you probably learn in second grade. Responsible means you take account, you're accountable for what happens for your actions, and I'm saying, will you be accountable for people like Mrs. Guerin if that problem happens?
With all due respect, Ms. Rainville, your question is so general that it's hard to provide an answer. What I would say is it depends on what specific violation of a condition. There is a process to enforce conditions in the certificate of public good. If a certificate of public good is issued, it's issued because the Public Service Board has made findings that the project won't have an undue adverse impact on the criteria.
Can I interrupt just for a moment?
And would you please let me finish? If in fact there is a violation of one of those conditions that's material, Mrs. Garrett or you or anybody else who has a concern about that can bring that complaint to the Public Service Board. It will be investigated, and a process is established in order to remedy it. If what you're saying is that there's some physical harm or some negligence, there are laws and processes in place to address those things. So if there is liability that's incurred by the project will be responsible for that liability. But to be more specific than that, with such a general question is really impossible. Do you have anything to ask?
No, I was just going to frame it from a non-lawyer's perspective. I don't know, I'm not one of those. Sorry. The project has submitted a petition that addresses all of the criteria, we feel has addressed specifically the criteria, and the board will assess that, and there is this process that we're about to begin, or we're in, where, all these questions for Ken, questions for natural resources, for whatever the resources, or whatever the question is, it's the project's responsibility, and we will do our best to answer the question. The board will set a bunch of conditions, I would expect, on the issuance of a certificate of public good, and the project has to operate within the certificate of public good and the board's order.
Actually, I'll come to you in a second, Mr. Pierce. Ms. Scalaby has had her hand up patiently for quite a while. We'll come to you as soon as she's done.
I think this is a good follow-up in light of, I have a question about the the noise, but I also have a question about fire and fly rock and safety, and more than that, to start there. So as a result of the conversation that's been going around, I'm just wondering, will the post-construction noise monitoring data be taken only when the turbines are at maximum output? Because like at Georgia Mountain, there were only 8 to 10 hours of turbines operating at maximum output out of over 2,000 hours of monitoring. And I'm wondering, do you think this is an accurate portrayal of average noise levels? And we use the same method of monitoring for Swanton. And as a follow-up, in light of all the problems at the PSB and what has been, talked about in the legislature about continuous monitoring to try to get in different bills, is that something also that Swanton would consider, continuous monitoring, to avoid these problems? And also the post-construction monitoring.
We haven't put together a post-construction monitoring protocol at this time. It's not proposed in the testimony. There's a lot of discussion right now with the Public Service Board about what the appropriate protocol is. And so I can't commit to doing anything one way or the other right now at this point.
Well, it will be what the Public Service Board rule establishes.
Well, obviously there needs to be a guarantee that it would be monitored at maximum output. Otherwise the data is a moot point, in my opinion. Okay, well, again, another answer, another question, and another answer yet to be determined at who knows when, at the date of the CPG issue. That's how things roll. So anyway, how would a fire be handled? Would the local fire stations be trained in dealing with a nacelle fire 400 feet or 500 feet in the air, 400 feet? If they weren't able to put it out, how would we be reassured the burning pieces won't catch the abutting woods or the nearby homes on fire? And is anyone from the fire department in here? And do you have any history of any other communities in Vermont who fire departments have been trained? Because obviously there are fires on a fairly regular basis of industrial wind turbines.
Okay, so first of all, I have met with the chief of the fire department here in Swanton, and we have talked about it. Second, turbine manufacturers all have their own individual turbine fire suppression systems within the turbine. Third, your other question was, have I had any experience? I worked on the Searsburg Wind Project in southwestern Vermont, which has 11 wind turbines. We coordinated with the Wilmington Fire Department. They do actual training. In the early years, I don't know if they still do it now, but in the early years, we did training with the turbine manufacturers, technicians, and we did a whole mock rescue. From somebody being hurt in the nacelle to fire, and they actually call it out. They come up from the fire station in Wilmington. They lower the guy in a gurney. So there's absolutely turbine training. Why do you shake your head? I mean, that's really rude. Sorry. There's actual training that takes place between the turbine manufacturer and the local fire department. You didn't mention Georgia Mountain, I don't think, but Georgia Mountain has an agreement with the local fire department. I've talked to the fire chief there as well, and they had planned the project, provided an opportunity to send firemen to specific turbine safety training.
Well, okay, thank you. I mean, all I know is that the highest building in Vermont is 10 stories currently in Burlington, and they're fighting something for 20 stories, and this is 40 stories up in the air. So the truth is, we have no experience in dealing with this at all, none. And I think the fire departments, if they are experienced enough, they would have to admit that, because the highest building in Vermont is 10 stories high. So anyway, about fly rock, you would have to agree that fly rock would be blasted over the abutting properties, during the blasting period. And what is the anticipated distance that the fly rock would travel, and also in relation to the fly rock and ice throw that can happen, does that mean that you would recommend, because the doobies are so close in proximity to the property line, that they should be wearing hard hats for safety during that time?
So Ian, can you address whether we know where blasting is going to occur on the project yet to answer Ms. Colby's question?
We don't specifically know if blasting is going to happen yet because we haven't done soundings on the project. So
it's
we can't
possible
really-
there won't be any blasting that would be near Mr. Doobie's property line.
That's possible.
But we don't know. Another answer we don't know. Okay, it's actually in the filing that explains the process for completing the civil engineering. There's also information in the filing about the use of a licensed blasting contractor and the need to comply with the Agency of Natural Resources best management practices for blasting to avoid environmental contamination. And it's actually very typical for projects, large construction projects, even non-utility projects, to go through a series of, and Ian can probably speak to this more with more authority, and so does Travis. But they go through development. Engineering plans start as conceptual plans, and over time they're refined as studies are done. Just as in this project, there was an initial civil engineering plan that was done. There was additional natural resource review that was performed. The project plans were modified to accommodate the natural resource features that were on the site. As the project then gets more mature, more civil engineering plans get more detailed. They'll be developed a particular blasting plan once they have done and completed all the soil borings and testing. And again, when I start getting really way out of my bounds, let me know. So it's not that there are, that this project has unknowns that are different from other construction projects. I don't know how much experience you have doing large construction projects, but this is actually very typical. And Ian, would you like to expound on that since you have more expertise?
You're worried about fly rock. Obviously, the blaster has to design their charges and mat the project sufficiently to not have fly rock in the project.
And is that Main Drilling and Blasting, the company that would be used?
That's who we've had prepare the blasting plan.
So another out-of-state contractor for a Vermont job?
Actually, they're local as well. Their name is Main Drilling Blasting, but they're local.
So who would pay for, will you be paying for the well, spring, and foundation inspections before and after construction?
The pre and post blast surveys are paid for by the project.
The pre and post blast surveys of well, spring, and foundation, are those all included?
The scope of that, I'm not sure of the moment. Normally, people aren't asking for wells and springs. Usually they're worried about structures being impacted.
So I'm kind of curious when we will get the deep, will there be like a designated time frame? Because I'm sure we won't get through all our questions, that all our questions will be answered and we'll actually get the answers to the questions, like on that particular question. Will you give Swanton Wind LLC, like, say, within 2 weeks, we would like details on the questions that were unanswered? How will this play out? I'm curious.
Well, the Section 248 process actually does not require this event to take place.
Okay.
So this is something that the board encouraged Swanton Wind to do in response to people being interested in having it done, and Swanton Wind frankly agreed to come up here tonight and do this. Somebody submitting additional written questions to them after tonight is over. Frankly, I don't know if the board even has the authority
authority to direct them to answer those questions. If they were served upon Swanton Wind by a party in discovery, Swanton Wind would absolutely have an obligation to answer those questions. But if it's just an interested person sending written questions, as I sit here today, I don't know if the board would have the authority to require Swanton Wind to answer, which is why as we started this particular segment of this evening, I was trying to encourage people to, prioritize your questions and stay focused, so we can get through as much as possible and get you as much information as we can this evening while we're all here.
I'll give someone else to speak, but I guess my concern, and I'll step away for other folks, is that I've been trying to get questions answered about prior projects and how they would compare to Swanton Wind from Ms. Staskis for 2 years now. And these are at Fairfield, select board meetings and things like that. I've issued them in writing, and we still have never gotten one answer. And to me, as people who will be greatly impacted by a project, and as you wanting to know the decision if a project will go in, it seems like we should be able to know these questions. And I've been trying to get questions for over 2 years, and not one has been answered, sir. I just want to point that out.
I appreciate your frustration.
It's frustration, yeah.
But, that is occurring outside the public service board process, and, frankly, maybe that's a public relations issue for Swanton Wind to make a decision on. The public service board, however, will not issue a decision on this project until it has all the information that it needs to make the decision. And it's not unusual in a large case for supplemental testimony to be filed, and interveners who may be opposed to a project file testimony in opposition that may prompt additional information to come out. But the board will not make a decision on this until it believes it has all the information it needs to make the decision, whether that decision is an approval or a denial.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
I just want to invite Ms. Colby. I want to make a suggestion, because I understand that you want the questions answered you would like, and you may or may not want to intervene in the proceeding, and I understand that. I worked on a case in Rutland where the city had counsel. And what they did is the members of the community who had questions like you did, but didn't want to spend their time at the Public Service Board, provided the questions that they wanted answered to the city attorney. All of the questions for every single neighbor in that neighborhood. This was a solar project that was smack dab in the middle of a residential community. Were fed through council, so that the project was required to answer all of those under oath and in discovery. I invite you to do the same thing, because we are, as Mr. Carter said, obligated to do that. It is, for some folks, an efficient way to be heard, because, as you know, both Fairfield and Swanton have very competent counsel. Ed Adrian is a very good advocate for both towns. And I would say if you have specific questions that you would like him to pose in discovery is coming up, you should do that. And we have an obligation to answer. And there will be, I think there's a second round of follow-up. So I just want to let you know there are other ways to do it, and it worked very well. And I can put you in touch with the folks in Rutland who met as a committee and made sure that the discovery of the city issue was consistent with the information that they wanted.
Yeah, just to clarify this column, I think what Ms. Cadwell is suggesting is that if you don't want to be a party and you still want to get some information, then if you can work with someone who is a party, then perhaps they can ask those questions for you.
Oh, I'll definitely.
Yes, and then Swanton Wind is under a discovery obligation to respond to those questions under oath. So perhaps that, and I appreciate that suggestion, Ms. Cadwell. So, yes, that looks like, is that Mr. Adrian?
That is Mr. Adrian. Hi, I'm Ed Adrian. We represent...
I didn't even know you were here.
I appreciate that, Ms. Cadwell. Yes, we do represent both Swanton and Fairfield, and we're more than happy to work with the towns. I do want to say that there is a little bit more of a process than Ms. Cadwell was saying, is that I can't directly accept questions from people and then just submit them to Swanton Wind, as much as that might be interesting. It does need to go through your select boards. So if I can be so bold, I see there's representatives from both those select boards here today. I suggest that if you do have questions and that the select boards are amenable to those questions, we of course would be more than happy to include those as part of the formal discovery. But if you call me or send me emails, I just have to send it back to them anyway. So it'd be easier if you go through them and then it comes to us. So thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks, Ed.
Appreciate everybody's input on that.
Yes, ma'am. I'll come to you next, sir.
Yes, my name is John Smith. I live in Swanton. One of the products of industrial wind turbines is shadow flicker, both sun and lumen. Curious as to what Swanton Wind is doing to protect its neighbors from shadow flicker.
So we study.
Sorry, your name, please?
Oh, sorry. It's Ryan Darlow. I work with Vera. And Ryan.
Brian, would you mind coming up this way so they don't have to say
There's
their
going to be a lot of sore necks if you don't.
Thank you.
So we studied shadow flicker from this project. As has been said before, we modeled the largest turbines that we were considering, and the results showed that no houses within the vicinity of the Swanton Wind project would have over 30 hours per year of shadow flicker, which is, if you look in my testimony, is below the recommended threshold for that.
Where does that come from?
Great question. So that threshold is been recommended in other New England jurisdictions, Massachusetts for one of them. It's also commonly used in Europe as well.
So it's like to the point where it's not torturous yet, so it's acceptable, or like, so it's okay to have some, but not a lot?
Yeah, so I guess, yeah, let me phrase that. That's 30 hours a year. There's 8,766 hours in a year, so we're talking about 2% of the year at a maximum. And remember, this effect is only within the very immediate vicinity of the project. So if you're standing a mile away, you won't experience that in shadow flicker.
I have a comment on shadow flicker, actually.
A question, Ms. Colby.
Well, I documented it because I live on the pond, and I was out there one day, and we had a particularly abnormal amount of sun this year in November and December. And from November 5th, for me, I'm just talking me, I'm not talking the Bushies or the Pierces or anything else, but from November 5th, based on where the turbines are located, is where we would start getting shadow flicker. And then it would go all the way until December, the winter solstice of December 20th, 21st, and then come back. So that's 14 weeks at potentially 2 hours, so that is just right under that minimum of torture of 30 hours. But that doesn't account for the moon. That's just the sun. So there's, there's a moonlit night tonight, and that doesn't account for the danger of it on a very, very busy road, which I don't know the ADT of, but Route 105.
So how far away are you from the project?
I'm a mile.
You're about a mile away? So shadow flicker intensity depends on how close you are to the turbine blades. Because the further away you get, the smaller the turbine blade appears to be within the disk of the sun. So the intensity diminishes. So at distances, generally we use a upper maximum that's extremely conservative in our assessment. If you can look at my report, I discussed this, of 2,000 meters, which is just over a mile. And that's a extremely conservative upper maximum distance that is well above what other jurisdictions have used for how far it is even possible to have any shadow flicker.
Well, all I know is when I went for one of my tours up at Georgia mountain, that shadow flicker projected out across the whole darn valley for miles and miles. But anyway, yeah, there's no moon account, and then the considerable dangers on Route 105.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm just curious, are you familiar with the logistics of Rocky Ridge, the Adirondacks and the lake, the directions that they're in? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not really sure what your question
Okay,
is.
my question is, do you understand that those turbines that are sitting on, proposed to be sitting on Rocky Ridge, are facing straight west, and the sun sets in the west? And if you were to drive down 105 in the space where this is going to be in without, shorter than those ranges that you're talking about, when the sun comes across the top, we see the sun all day long until it's gone. And if the sun is shining directly into those turbines, which would be behind the people who live on 105, it's like if the sun is over here, straight on, and the wind comes from the west and the south. So those turbines are going to be primarily facing either south or west most of the time. So when the sun goes down 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to be there in the summer until 8 o'clock, 8:30. Are the people on the front of where these blades are the ones that are going to see it?
So for specific technical details on our analysis, please check out my assessment that I included in my testimony. But we did consider things like cloud cover and available hours of daylight of sun based on the location of the project. We did consider the wind direction, that is part of the analysis. But as you mentioned, the wind turbine blades aren't always oriented exactly perpendicular. So there could be a morning when the sun rises, as I mentioned, in the east, and the wind turbines are facing north. And so the sun is going to be going the blades will act as a single point, and they won't have a huge disc as they would in the worst case scenario when the sun is perpendicular to the rotor plane.
Okay, so my question again, a clarification question. Which direction are the turbines facing relative to the sun when the largest possibility of flicker occurs?
So the turbines are all each independently free and are self-driven to rotate around in any direction.
Whichever
on
direction the wind is blowing.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the wind is blowing primarily from the west or from the south, which it is 99% of the time, or maybe 90% of the time, what direction are those turbines going to be facing?
They will be facing west or south when the wind is from those directions.
My question again is that the place that they're in when the sun flicker is the worst?
So the timing of all this is very situationally dependent. I think you're getting to the root of your question here, which is that the sun does have to be setting and in order to cast a shadow on the eastern part of the project, or rising to cast it on the western part of the project, the west of the project, and the wind needs to be in that direction at the same time. So the analysis that I did incorporates all of those factors into it.
That doesn't answer my question.
I guess I'm not understanding what your question is.
I don't see how hard it is, especially since those of us who live on 105, we know 85, 90, I'll drop it down a little, 85, 90% of the time, the wind is blowing from the west or from the south. I have a 2-acre lawn, and people say to me, God, that's hard to rake. And I said, I don't have to rake my lawn because the leaves end up in shelter. So that means that the wind blows all the time, 99% of the time, all the time.
Okay, so I think I got, yeah, so if you're saying you live on 105, which means you live to the west of the project, is that correct?
Correct.
So if the sun is setting also on the west of the project, the turbines won't cast any shadow on your house because you will be in front of that turbine from where your house is.
So the flicker will be on the east as opposed to the west.
Correct.
So the Fairfield Pond people are the ones that are going to get it.
So if you look at my testimony, it includes maps that show the region where the project is and shows how many hours of shadow flicker are expected in those different areas. So you can go and take a look there and see how many hours are expected at your house.
Can I ask a question? Fred Parks, can I ask a question? So, and you said at the beginning of your discussion here, you said that the lateral distance of the definition of shadow flicker is how far away from the turbine? In that under a scenario, sun is setting in the west. You know, I'm sitting here, I'm looking due west. There's the turbine, let's say, in front of that big orange sun. Okay, how far away am I going to experience the definition of shadow flicker?
Oh, okay. So the calculations that we do go out 2,000 meters from the locations of the wind turbine. So it's a little over a mile horizontal. And we are trying to yield a conservative model that is then essentially over-predict what the reality of the situation is, similar to how Ken does with sound. And so one of our methods of kind of over-predicting is that we assume that there's no diminishing of intensity of shadow flicker, which is, as I said earlier, the fact that as you eventually get further away, the thickness of the blade becomes undiscernible with respect to the larger disk of the sun. So I guess my answer to you is, in my assessment, if you are within 2,000 meters of any of the turbines, then it is possible that you would experience shadow flicker. I don't know exactly where you live, so I can't give you an exact answer.
Thank you. And a quick follow-up. So let's just use if I'm 2,000 meters away, and then, if I'm 4,000 meters away, but the last 2,000 meters of that is flat Fairfield Pond water, reflection, etc., what's the effect of that?
Reflection wouldn't affect a shadow.
Unlike nighttime lights, that's another story.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Paula Pearsall. I have a cabin on Fairfield Pond. I'm soon to be moving there this summer with a house that we're hoping won't be affected by our move. A simple question, would you be willing to put up 7 balloons at 499 feet so homeowners can actually get a visual of this site, of the turbines? Would that be a possibility? Whoever could answer that, I think that would be a simple thing to do, right? So everybody along the area affected could see what we're affecting. Would you do that?
Well, think about that. That's a great suggestion.
Okay. And thank you. And I have one more question. If a neighbor had a complaint regarding noise emitting from the project, how long would it take to resolve that complaint? With the new complaint protocol, it still took 5 weeks to fix a screamer on Georgia Mountain. Do you find that acceptable?
That's up to the Public Service Board.
So what we're asking here is not helping. Thank you.
Thought I saw, I'll come back to you, sorry. I thought I saw a hand back over this.
Yeah, it was mine, but my question was answered.
Okay, then yes, sir.
I'm sorry, Fred Parks again. I have a question. So, Council, your answer to the question of do you find what was done acceptable, your answer was it's up to them to define what they determine to be acceptable. I think the question was, would that be acceptable to you?
It really has nothing to do with the project, so I'm not going to answer the question.
In other words, no.
Well, I'm not going to. I have clients that need things from these people, and so I'm not going to sit here and insult them.
Would rather insult us. I got
If we could just kind of, I understand that this is really important to people, and I also understand that everybody's had a long day and it's getting a little bit late, so emotions may run a little bit high, but if we could just all try to really be polite to each other, then I think we'll, as I said earlier, move through things a little bit more efficiently. So yes, this gentleman here, and then we'll move to the woman that's standing right next to him.
I'm Luke DeLon from Swanton.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Clearly DeLon. Luke DeLon. Question about the shadow flickers. If
you're saying that the sun comes up from the east, directly from east. These turbines are going to be shadowing on the west. 105 goes from north to south on the west side. When that sun comes up in the morning, or even the moon, more than 15 minutes, because you say 30 hours in a year's time, which is not enough. In 15 minutes, you're saying that that sun's going to come up and be on the other side before it shadows, flickers on 105 too much? There's 1,000 vehicles that goes on that road plus. And the dangers that it would cause those people that drive on that road, they can cause accidents or drive off the road thinking that something is coming down at them because of the shadow flicker and go off the road and kill somebody that is walking on their lawn or raking their lawn or whatever, or jogging. So you're saying it's only going to be 15 minutes per day or less that we're going to see the sun and not including the moon?
Okay, so I never said anything about a certain number of minutes per day.
Well, you said 30 hours. So that
Per
knocks-
year.
Per year.
Yes.
That knocks it down to the very minimal per day. And that sun comes up, and it stays up for quite a long time on the east side before it starts going to the west. And the shadows go on 105 for a long time.
So if you want more information on how the calculations are actually worked, please, I refer you to the shadow flicker assessment that I published. It is a terrain-specific, location-specific assessment. So the assessment takes into consideration the location on the earth and where the sun rises, sets, and travels throughout the day in 1-minute intervals for the entire day. It also takes into consideration the probability of sunshine and the probability of a wind turbine being in whichever direction it is based on when, as we discussed before, the turbine comes from both the south and the west. So that is how it generates that value. Now, guide you to look at the report. I believe it's the second map, which is the expected case, and it shows you how many hours per year are expected to hit everything within 2,000 meters of the project, which includes the section of 105 that you're discussing.
Right, which is less than a half a mile, correct?
No, well, I'm not exactly sure the exact
It's
feet.
less than a half a mile.
Sure.
So they will be, the people who travel on that section of the road will get attacked from those, not attacked, but would see those shadow flickers in the mornings and at night when there's a moon.
So, right, but 105 is a north-south road, right?
Correct, but it's on the west side.
Okay, but it's oriented north-south, so when you're driving in 105, you're either going to be looking north at the road in front of you, or south at the road in front of you, correct?
But you still get the shadow flicker, it's going to come right in front of you.
But it's coming from the side of you, so unless you're driving like this, you're not gonna experience it.
You're still going to see it in front of you. When it goes onto your vehicle, it's a shadow flicker. Just like an airplane that goes over the top, or a bird.
All right, so I really want you to take a look at the way the report is done. It explains how it all works.
Okay, we're going to go to this.
Hi, I'm Michelle DeLon, I live in Swanton. So whether the shadow flickers is 1 hour, 30 hours, 100 hours, the people that have to live under these conditions, what would you suggest to them to do their daily lives when it's being affected by it? What are they supposed to do, leave their home for 30 hours?
I'm not going to make any suggestions about what you do with your personal time.
But these people, you need to give them an idea of what to do to live under these conditions. You are taking away something that is enjoyment in their home, and they have to live under these conditions. Whether it's an hour, 30 hours, 100 hours, it doesn't make a difference. They don't live under these conditions now, why should they have to live under them when they're up? So my question is, what would you suggest for these people
since we don't think that there's an undue adverse impact, the choice is for.
You said 30 hours, so there's 30 hours of an impact. At least.
So we've answered the question, and I
You did
and I
answer the
appreciate,
question.
and I very much appreciate that you're concerned, but, there really isn't
So in
any
other
more.
words, you're telling them, too bad, it's your problem, you live there, you're close to these, and you have to live under these conditions whether you like it or not.
That's
And
not-
that is not right.
Well, that's not what we're saying, but I do.
That is what you're saying.
But I do appreciate that's how you perceive it, and I regret that.
Okay, we're gonna do Mr. Doobie, and then, the woman in the back of the room, and then we're gonna take our next quarter break.
Okay, I'm just, from the crowd, I was just hopeful that maybe we could get some, we got some experts here on wildlife. I know they've done a lot of work on stormwater, so I was just gonna, respectful to the people that have questions on shadow flicker, if we could get to, I'd love to hear, and I think a lot of us wanna get to other issues, so that's my answer.
Yeah, okay, great. And to the extent that we can move along efficiently, I think that would benefit all of us, so I appreciate the observation. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, so I just have one last question about the shadow. You want to see here?
Did you say your name again?
Oh, Danielle Harris. Has there been another project in Vermont where the same type of thing has happened, where the shadow flicker has gone on the road? Or will this be the first time?
I'm gonna be reported to you guys for the PSB if there was a problem.
If somebody complained, then we would hear about it, and absent that happening, I'm in the same boat as these folks, I'm unaware. That doesn't mean it didn't happen, doesn't mean it did, I'm just unaware, sorry.
So more than likely, it probably has. So we don't really know the extent to the damage that that could possibly do. And my question to end this part of the question and answer is it worth it? Is it worth it?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that's, obviously they think it is worth it, and obviously that is going to be the big question before the Public Service Board as this case proceeds. So I appreciate that. We're going to take our court reporter break, and we can come back if people still have questions about public safety, then we'll try to wrap up on that topic before moving on to others. Okay, we're trying to finish off the topic of public health and safety. So if anybody has any questions related to that, yes, sir.
My name's David Butterfield from Swanton. I have a question on, I understand that the number 5 service is going to have an NOR on it for noise reduction. Is that true?
So right now, under the proposed turbine, what was recommended, it's a NRO, a noise reduced operation, a 2 decibel.
So why are you putting on just the number 5?
The number 5 curb end is,
Right in front
here.
of my house.
Yep. And so it's the closest to the area or the neighborhood with the highest noise impact. So that putting an NRO of 2 decibels has the essentially the most benefit.
Why can't you put them on all of them?
Well, there's a cost benefit to putting the NRO on. So
We
the
got
NRO
costs.
reduces
We got
the
costs in this.
the NRO reduces the sound level, but also reduces the curb out.
I got one more question. Can I ask a question on intervenership? Or is that later on?
Why don't you go ahead and ask it, because I'm not so sure we're
It's
going
a
to
quick question.
Yeah.
If we choose to hire a professional to, for sound or whatever, are we gonna be able to access the property? Or at one time or another, can we access the property?
If you intervene, you can of course hire any experts that you want to address particular matters. I unfortunately can't give you legal advice, but I would suggest to you that there are probably mechanisms associated with the process that's called discovery.
I'm asking Swanton Wind, is that something that they would be acceptable to?
Then you'd have to ask them, yeah, you'd have to ask them.
In the discovery process, if you are an intervener, there is a process for requesting access to land to do an inspection. So that's what I can tell you, and if you make the request, we would consider it in accordance with the rules that govern the Public Service Board.
And what I can tell you is that if you do make such a request and you're not satisfied with the response and there's a disagreement about it, then the Public Service Board will resolve that disagreement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, oh, yep, yes, sir.
Fred Parks again. My question, and I hope it's okay to ask it this time, is about nighttime lighting. There's an opportunity, I understand, to utilize newer technology that would be radar-activated lighting for winter, for industrial winter. Does Swanton Wind have any background with that, and/or any, do they have are you open to being, I'll say the phrase required to utilize that as part of a certificate of public good if you were to receive it?
So, there is new technology. I think what you're referring to is like radar activated, okay?
Versus blinking all the time.
Right. And the project, so let me start by saying the project has to light the project based upon federal aviation requirements. So it's kind of out of our hands. We have to do what they tell us to do. So that's number one. And actually, I'll take advantage of your question and say, just to be clear, the lighting of any turbine for FAA purposes would be up on top of the nacelle. It will not be on the blades, it will not be spinning around.
I'm well aware of George Mountain.
Okay, it'll be up, well, some folks don't know, sorry, I took advantage of your question. So anyway, it would be on top of the nacelle. There is, that technology, my understanding is it's not deployed. And so we would certainly have to look at that as part of our meeting the board's requirements, but it's not deployed in Vermont, to my knowledge. I don't think it's in the country, yeah.
So I guess I'll ask the follow-up question. Would Swanton Wind be willing to implement it when it has become deployed someplace in the country?
If it's cost effective, that's what my concern is. As I understand it, it's like, we won't be able to, we can't afford it. But we're certainly, it's absolutely in the consideration of being able to do the project.
Okay, now next we're getting into natural resource criteria. So perhaps some of them, I'm sure some of them will have great interest to people, but some might not. So maybe we'll start moving along a little bit more, but maybe not.
The first one is outstanding resource waters.
Really?
Okay. I just want to make sure that people don't have questions.
Well, it's because,
before we move
the
on.
reason I said that's because there is a specific list of those, and we know that they're not in Swanton.
Right.
And that's the answer.
The next one is water and air pollution. So it's just a bit of a broad topic.
Ms. Colby, you're the only one so far?
So what type of stormwater mitigation techniques will you be using? Also, what percent of stormwater will flow into Lake Champlain and what percent will flow into Fairfield Pond?
My name's Scott Homestead.
Scott, you mind?
Yeah.
Come up, Brian, thank you.
I'm Scott Homestead. I'm a civil engineer and stormwater designer for Krebs and Lansing, and we've been working through the preliminary stormwater design for the project. The measures we have proposed right now are a series of what we call wet ponds. There are a half a dozen of them on the access road, and then another 9 on the crane pad. That number may adjust up or down slightly as we finalize the calculations and design, but that is what we've sort of blocked off in terms of area for stormwater treatment measures right now.
So you said wet ponds?
Wet.
That's just like a retention pond?
It is a retention pond with a permanent pool of water in a 4-bay, designed in accordance with the current Vermont State Stormwater Management Manual, which is the accepted manual for best stormwater management practices in Vermont. So that is, and then in addition to that, the conveyance system for stormwater to get to the wet ponds will be a series of stone or grass line channels adjacent to the roads. The areas that are steep will be stone lines to prevent erosion. The flatter areas will be grass lined, which will provide additional treatment above and beyond what we achieve in the ponds. To answer your question regarding the flows, all of the stormwater from impervious surfaces on the project flows towards Hungerford Brook. None of it flows towards Fairfield Pond.
So when did that change? Because before it was 95% to Lake Champlain
I
and
can answer
5% to Fairfield Pond
Sure.
through those impaired waterways.
Yes, I can. What I can tell you, there is the overall project right now. There is only a very little sliver in this area that flows towards Fairfield Pond, and what we were able to do was carry a stormwater swale past that area. So the runoff from the road in that area flows into our grass channel, which will flow to a stormwater pond over here, which will discharge to a tributary that flows towards Hungerford Brook rather than towards.
Well, okay. I won't go into my 30-year career in transportation and dealing with road issues and impervious surfaces and stormwater runoff.
Well, that's fine.
But, you are aware that, the 100% now that will flow into Lake Champlain is going to go into St. Albans Bay and Missisquoi Bay, and those are the main priorities for cleanup, for water quality, with a goal of 65% TMDL reduction.
Right.
And so how the A&R could approve
The
that.
mechanism for meeting those standards is by designing towards the state standards.
So you're not going to use any of the level spreaders that failed in
No,
Lowell?
there's no, my understanding is the level spreads were fine, but we're not proposing any of them on this project.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I need to talk to you. Okay, you have reached into the package that I have prepared for other reasons, and I just want to ask you, are you familiar with the acceptable management practices for maintaining water quality on logging jobs in Vermont?
I've seen it, I'm not intimately familiar with it.
I'm on the Friends of Northern Lake Champlain board and have been forever. And when I was in the legislature many times, last year, Denise Smith, who was the executive director at the time, was talking about the quality of the lake, et cetera, et cetera. So my question for you is, you can't see this, but if you're familiar with the practices, I can explain what it says here. And basically, this is a picture of a logging truck machine, which is required by these management practices to make a small bridge over streams in order to maintain the sides of the stream. And I just need to know what your opinion is about what you just said, which doesn't make sense to me, because according to these management practices, forests play a vital role in providing for clean water. An intact forest floor, which contains wood, leaf litter, humus, fibrous roots, in addition to mineral soil, is the most important element of the forest that helps to filter sediment and other pollutants from surface runoff. Because forest soils are often highly porous and permeable, rainwater can infiltrate into the soil freely. The litter and humus protect the mineral soil from raindrops by absorbing the impact energy of rain droplets. So my question to you is, as a scientist, as an engineer, is how do you propose and how do you say that you will protect that entire ridgeline with the blasting and the removal of trees? How do you say to me that you are following the same practices that the loggers have to follow and not dislodging the soil, which ultimately ends up in Lake Champlain?
I think I can speak to that. I think there were probably really a couple questions within that I can talk to. You mentioned having to span streams. Every stream crossing on our plan is a span stream. We're not proposing any disturbance within streams. They're not just culverts, they'll actually be bridges over them. So I think that it probably exceeds the logging standards in those cases.
But how do you compare that equipment used to build these 500-foot turbines to a logging truck that would make a tiny, the question would be, would one of those large trucks, whatever, these building vehicles that do really move large amounts of dirt and soil and rocks, would that be heavier? And you really honestly think that those little bridges would take care of those trucks?
Well, I think what I would say is that on this site, any site, it doesn't rain anymore after our project than it does now, and so it's a management issue in terms of making sure that the stormwater is treated correctly before it reaches waters of the state. And both during construction, when we will have a detailed erosion prevention and sediment control plan, featuring silt fences, divergent dikes, check dams, stone lining, stabilized pads. The intent of that is to prevent any sediment and disturbed soil from running off the site. And that'll be part of our state stormwater permit, and that'll be part of the Public Service Board approval. That will all be incorporated. And in terms of the treated water that you reference, forest litter and those things achieving, the goal of our stormwater design is to mimic those conditions as much as we can. And we do that by using the ponds and channels to slow the flows, and then those ponds outlet to the vegetated areas, and we do that by releasing the water at a slow rate so that it can trickle out and get that same sort of treatment after it leaves the site, in addition to what we do on the site.
Can you say with no doubt in your mind that these kinds of actions, we'll call them actions, these kinds of measurements that you're doing, these kinds of construction things that you're doing is going to really work as well as nature does?
I can tell
What
you
if
that,
you're wrong?
I can tell you that I've designed stormwater management systems on this sites, these type of sites, commercial sites, residential sites, and there is a permanent mechanism for inspecting those systems and filing reports for years after. I probably do 25 to 50 of them a year, and generally, if the system is installed correctly and maintained correctly, they generally function very well.
But my question
and
is,
mimic natural conditions.
are you saying that your profession and your knowledge and your abilities are going to handle the normal water flow on those ridges as well as Mother Nature would?
I think that's sort of conjecture. I can say I'm comfortable with the design and how it will perform up to the state standards.
I'm sorry, did you just say that you inspect like 25 times a year?
No, that was the number of systems that I personally inspect.
Oh, okay. But, you know, I read the thing, and I believe there's 5 stream crossings, which is huge in an area that is rich with vernal pools and peat bogs and carbon storing properties that slowly release, you know, our pounding rains. And I believe that one of the culverts was 5 feet open box culvert for AOP, you know, which is all good stuff and everything like that. But it shows how massive this project is on a scale, like from my house, where the sea level is of the pond to, and this will be in my intervening, to the top of the ridge, is only about 350 feet. So it's almost 150 feet less, the rise of the ridge, to what the turbines would be on top. Now that's a whole nother thing for out of scale, but when I thought I misheard you say the inspection, how will we, the residents, know that these are being maintained, because we'll never be able to get up there. And when I went up to Georgia Mountain one time, and Martha saw me taking photos, those ditches and those culverts and those stone lined ditches and those check dams had looked like, and I'm basing this on my history, I have a knowledge. I work for Vermont Local Roads and I know about this stuff. Looked like they had never been maintained since the project went in. Then, because she saw me taking photos, and I have all the photos, there was going to be an open house. They were perfect. They had been perfectly all cleaned out and looked all great. How will we ever know if our project is being maintained just like the people up at Georgia Mountain and Lowell Mountain could never know unless you sneak up there and try to find out?
I can't speak to other projects.
Well,
Our project will be subject to the typical inspection and reporting requirements of any project.
Well, that's failed in the past, so. I have a question. So you folks put up a Met Tower without filing for a permit, and that violation process is pending. Are you using the data gathered from that illegal Met Tower for this application?
Mr. Conner, I'm not going to answer that question. That's a pending docket.
Yeah, Ms. Pelkey, as an initial matter, we're doing water and air pollution right now.
Yeah.
And that is a docket that is open and being litigated, the status of that Met Tower.
And I want to be really clear, we're not answering any questions about the Met Tower because of that docket.
Yeah,
Is it fair to ask why the data gathered from a Met Tower is not considered in the application process? That seems awfully confusing to me.
Well, the Met Tower is not part of this project proposal, and that taken in together with the fact that there is a contested pending litigated proceeding before the board regarding the Met Tower, I'm going to have to request that people not ask questions about the Met Tower. I'm sorry, that's just unfortunately the way it is. So.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
Yes, sir.
Now, you're saying you want the air pollution and water. How much CO2 is going to be created during the construction of the project with all the equipment that's being put up there that is being supposedly run by fossil fuels, can be created per turbine?
So the amount of CO2 isn't measured. What I can tell you is that it's, you're probably, it sounds like you have some experience doing major construction projects. And there's nothing really unusual about constructing this project that would be different from, constructing something else that requires the same type of equipment over the duration of the construction period. So I don't think that you would experience. Would you like me to finish, please? Would you let me finish, please? Next. I don't think that you'll find that there is an excess of CO2 that's emitted from the vehicles and equipment that are used both for transporting and installing it. Travis, you might be able to speak to the kinds of construction equipment that's used and the kinds of emissions that.
Well, yeah,
all the equipment meets the current emission standards, so that's something,
Yes, it meets the current standards, but it's not just the equipment, it's also the concrete that creates CO2, the blasting that creates CO2.
That's right, just like any
Cutting
other
out the
construction
trees,
project.
but that's a lot more than the regular construction project. So the construction project is a lot smaller than this project per turbine. Because you're looking at from the time it gets mined all the way until they get installed. And every time you cut a tree, you're taking away a tree that collects CO2, which state of Vermont has the cleanest air because we had a lot of trees. And every time you take a tree out, you're taking the CO2 protection away from us, from the state of Vermont. And it doubles.
It's 36 acres of trees that we're talking about cutting.
That's quite a bit of CO2 that it takes.
And I think that, to answer the question about the, it sounds like you're talking about either doing an inventory or a life cycle analysis, and neither of those are required.
But the thing is, we're supposed to get rid of CO2, right? This 8 turbine creates 245,000 plus tons of CO2. And you times it by 7. That's how much CO2 is in the air.
Do you have those?
All you have to do is Google it.
Well, I do know
It's on
that
there.
Vermont
It's legit.
produces 8.37 million metric tons of CO2, and 8.23 million metric tons are removed by our beautiful green mountains and forests that bring in our tourism dollars. And the rest of that is, the two main things are transportation and home heating, where we should be focusing on our efficiency. But, what about containment? What would be done for containment, and can it be effective if it's windy? For instance, 55 gallons of oil were sprayed onto trees at Sheffield due to a seal failure. A failure like that would not be good right next to those wetlands. When you look at those maps, there's an enormous amount of wetlands all around. So, how many gallons of oil and hydraulic fluid and antifreeze and other fluids are contained in each turbine and each substation? And what is the containment process for that, and how often is it monitored?
So I think somebody earlier asked a question about the oil, and we've already answered that right now until there's a turbine selected, the volumes of that we don't know. Do you want to talk about secondary containment for?
Yeah, all transformer oil has a secondary containment system provided for it. So each transformer will have a containment node. It's sized at, it's basically 1.5 times the volume of the oil in the device itself. And that'll be contained in the node, so if there's a spill, it stays right there.
So how did 55 gallons, which is a pretty big drum of oil, get sprayed over all the trees in the area in Sheffield?
You're going to have to address that question to the folks that do the Sheffield project. This is about our project, and Ian just provided you with information about the secondary containment that we're going to be using for our project.
The gentleman back here has had his hand up for a bit.
Quick question, follow up on the greenhouse gas discussion. Question 15 in the Martha Statkus testimony states, will the project cause undue or unreasonable greenhouse emissions? The answer was no. If we get a definition tonight of unreasonable or undue greenhouse emissions, is your answer no?
Yeah, what I would say is that it's an unreasonable amount. And I'm going to answer the question for you.
Okay, so Martha can, is that your
Yes,
answer?
actually, I'm going to answer the question for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So usually a reasonableness standard is a standard that weighs a number of factors. So here, the benefits of the project outweigh the greenhouse gas emissions that are associated with the vehicles and equipment that are going to be used for construction, for transportation. There's also some consideration being given to the fact that the fuel that's being used to power the turbines is fossil free. So I think what you find at the Public Service Board when folks are talking about whether something is reasonable or not, it's really taking all of the facts and circumstances together. Martha may have a different answer after she and I have a consultation, now that I know what kind of cross-examination she'll face.
I'm not going to cross-examine at all. You not answered the question, but thank you.
Okay, not seeing any more hands. The next topic is headwaters. Okay, not seeing any hands. The next topic is waste disposal.
Well, I mean, that could have been part of, but we don't know any answers, because they don't know the turbine model yet, so we don't know anything about the oils. Can you tell us how often oils are changed in a transformer or in the turbines, and how much, oils typically are contained in the models that you're looking at? Where do you dispose of the waste? Anything?
Do you want to ask one question at a time?
Well, they're all kind of tied together. How much oil or other chemicals, whether it be hydraulic fluid, antifreeze, whatever other fluids are in turbines and substations, how many gallons do they take? How often do they have to be maintained and changed out? What do you do with them afterwards?
So, as, I'll try. I know, as Ian has already addressed, that the transformers and the turbines and equipment that contains oil will have secondary containment. Thank you. Secondary containment, sorry. I can tell you that typically the turbine vendors, turbine O&M, operations and maintenance crew, will do biannual maintenance. There's usually a more top to bottom, check every nut and bolt and fluid level, and a good example is all the bolts that hold down the turbine will be marked, and they'll see if they move. So there's a physical inspection, a detailed inspection, they check fluid levels. All of those will be, any changing of fluids and the O&M processes will be done under state standard regulations for transporting and moving those materials.
So, speaking of O&M, and now that we've got to the truth about the substation earlier, being similar in size, not some tiny little thing like is at Georgia Mountain, is it safe to assume that the substation will be as large as it would be at Georgia Mountain? And I can't remember if it was addressed, and I apologize if it was, how many decibels that emits.
I thought you talked about that.
There's no substation.
There isn't a substation, and can address the transformer question before.
Just so I think maybe people are talking by each other a little bit here. The structure that Ms. Colopy is referring to that sits at the bottom of the, I think it's the access road to Georgia Mountain. If that's not a substation, what is it?
Switchgear?
Switchgear?
So Swanton Wind does not have to have that same type of large structure?
No, I thought I said it did.
Yes, you did
It's
say
not
it
a
did.
substation. You keep calling it a substation.
Well,
You don't call it a substation.
my error,
Well,
my
no,
Okay,
error.
stop talking over each other, please.
Sorry. So, so we are talking together. I'll be honest with you, when you say substation, based upon my experience with Green Mountain Power or any of the utilities, that is an enclosed area with a chain link fence and a much bigger situation than what we're talking about at the switchgear for this project. That's all.
So you're saying it wouldn't be as big as what's at Georgia Mountain?
No, I didn't say that. I said it's not gonna have a chain link fence and be an enclosed area. Well,
Well, in the
sorry.
substation, warranty includes the transformers too.
There, that's right.
And the transformers here are up beside each other.
So I think what they're saying, Ms. Colby, is that there will be a structure, but it's not called a substation. It's a structure that's going to enclose the switching gear. So and I understand your concerns are more about the size of the structure rather than what it's called.
Well, and also the decibels that may be emitted from it. And I can't remember if you alluded to that or not. I'm sorry if I can't remember.
I know that Mr. Kaliski earlier said that the transformers, I believe, which are, if I'm remembering correctly, are up at each individual turbine, and the decibels of the transformers were taken into account as sound modeling, but that the primary sound source in any event would be the turbines themselves, not the transformers.
Right.
So, gentleman over by the camera.
Luke DeLon, Swanton. You're saying the oils, and hydraulic fluids and all that. You're gonna be using oil from Exxon, Mobil, Castrol, am I correct? For these turbines?
I don't know what the source of that will be right now.
But am I kind of correct to be coming from these companies?
She just said she didn't know.
Because when I looked it up to see what they take for oil, these companies were coming up. And only these companies. The big major, Mobil, oil, and oil refineries and all that, which is fossil fuels, if I'm correct. And you say these are fossil fuel free?
I said
Well,
I said the fuel
it-
the fuel that powers them is the wind. They are fossil, the
But they're
fuel
still
that powers
fossil, oil is fossil fuel, one way or the other.
Oil's not powering the
No, but
turbine.
it's still a fossil, it's still coming from the ground, it's still a fossil fuel.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely right.
So it's not fossil fuel free, correct?
What I said was that the fuel that powers the turbines is the wind, and the wind is fossil fuel free. That's what I said.
No, you didn't say it that way. You said.
Well,
let's
I
just say-
apologize for the
You said
misunderstanding.
they were fossil fuel.
Let me be really clear. Let me be really, really clear. The fuel that powers the wind turbines is wind and it's fossil free. There are oils that are used in transformers. Sometimes they're synthetic. Sometimes they're fossil fuels. We don't know what oils will be used as I understand it. In the equipment, what I would also say is that all of the oil-filled equipment and all of the materials that the fossil fuels, so to speak, all of those oils, all of that is governed, the protection of that, all of that is governed by federal law to ensure that it doesn't end up in the waters of the U.S. So in addition to the secondary containment, there are other requirements for the storage and inspection and that kind of thing of fossil fuels that are used in projects like that. Is that fair?
So in other words, we're supposed to get rid of fossil fuels. We'll never get rid of fossil fuels if we need oil.
I don't think we agree with that, but I understand your position.
I know it takes less, but you still need the oil.
Yeah, if we could move on, this is turning into a debate rather than a question and answer, and I think, I hope that her clarification that she just gave you a better idea of what their position is with respect to oil versus fuel to spin the blades and things like that, so.
I have a different question than fuel.
Sure. We're into waste disposal, so.
So I'm wondering when you did your bird and your bat studies? And like, when were the most active timeframes in
This,
2015?
we're trying to finish up waste disposal before we move on to other topics. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep us from jumping around too much. Okay, so not seeing any more, oh, yes?
If there's a problem with leakage of any kind of oils, all the people around there have drilled wells. What if something happened where the runoff of this oil affects their drinking water? Who's responsible for making it right to the people who have drilled wells?
I would say the project absolutely would be responsible for that, no question.
So you're saying the developer would be responsible to make it right to those people?
Well, I would say that whoever owns the project, yeah, absolutely. If the oil spills and causes contamination in a well, yeah. We don't think that's gonna happen, but yes.
Well, I mean, anything nowadays is a possibility.
I know, media could follow us right now. What?
So containment of the wells, you're saying that the developers would be taking care of it. So what if the concrete, when they pour the concrete into make the pad, and it's very deep, and we lose water? Or our water amount goes down, who takes care of that? Is it still the developer?
Well, I'm gonna defer. I think that's, yeah, I suppose I defer to the experts on whether that's even a remote possibility.
Let's do a hypothetical situation.
You say pretty unlikely, but up in, I know it's a different project, but Georgia Mountain, a couple had plenty of water in their well before the project started. Before they're even done taking a shower, they run out of water. And you wouldn't do nothing about it. That's the reason why I'm asking the question. If it gets covered.
It's just extremely unlikely, never run into that.
Well, this project is awful close to homes. Less than 1,800 feet is the closest home. I'm concerned for those people, and for ourselves, even though we're further away. That's why I asked the question. Does the developer
Well,
gonna take care
other
of
than
it?
the fact that it's really, really unlikely.
Is the developer gonna take care of that water line?
We've answered the question.
Answer is no.
Well, I think the answer is the court would probably settle that. The next topic is water conservation. Okay. Floodways. Streams. I know we kind of touched on streams once already. Okay. Shorelines.
The only thing I want to say about shorelines, real quick, is that my husband and I ran the Fairfield Pond Recreation Association for 16 years, and we were fighting advocates for the SPA, the Shoreline Protection Act. And I have heard from numerous people around the pond that when you can gut a mountain and clear cut 36 acres and fill it with concrete and all those things and change the flow of streams and everything, the Shoreline Protection Act, it's almost comical, and I told the Fish and Wildlife this, it's almost comical to think that you would request people to not cut a tree on their property for up to 250 feet from the shoreline so that they can see the pond better, but yet you've got that mountain. And the Shoreline Protection Act on Fairfield Pond will be totally, nobody will give a crap. It will be disregarded, it will not be respected, and it will be worthless. Because it makes absolutely no sense when I fought for 10 years to get that Shoreline Protection Act passed because we were the last state in New England to do it. Finally they did it, not after a bunch of clear cutting took place first, to get it all in before the law went into effect. And just, I don't know, it breaks my heart. Breaks my heart.
I would just ask, it's almost 5:09, we've been here for almost 4 hours. I would just ask if we could encourage questions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I do. Ms. Colby, I understand how important this is to you, but for really the benefit.
Well, it is shoreline, and it is
I
related
understand,
to shoreline.
but we're here to ask questions, to get
I know,
information.
I'm sorry.
And no, it's okay. Come the week of July 17th, there will be a public hearing where that will be absolutely appropriate and appreciated by the board. The 3 board members will be there, and that's the kind of perspective that they want to hear. Tonight, we're just trying to get through the question and answer, so I don't mean to come across as rude or cutting you off.
No, you're not.
I'm
You're
just
not.
trying to keep things
You're
moving.
not.
Okay, thank you. Next is wetlands. Yes, sir.
Mark Newton. And also, thanks for coming, folks. I didn't say that earlier. I'm just curious, was there any wetland studies done off of Swanton with the Belisle's property? And was there any pre-excavation road work done off of and out of the boundaries of you folks' property, mainly Belisle and Orville?
I think what Mark's gonna do is remember,
I'm sorry, Martha.
oh, I'm sorry.
Speak up a little bit.
Oh, I think what Mark was referring to is when the very first wetland delineation work was done, there were flags set on Marcotte's property. And so we removed those when we didn't move forward with the Marcotte. I think that's what you're implying. I've addressed this at Fairfield. That's what you're
At
asking,
Fairfield, you told me
right?
since I was not the landowner, I really couldn't even be asked that question.
Right, we talked to
And
them.
I had a legal lease, I was managing
Right.
the property. So I did have all the rights to ask that question.
I'm not
Yeah.
questioning that. Yeah.
No, I don't mean
Good, okay.
And you're right, that's exactly what I'm talking about. How come, so is the answer, yes, there was engineering done?
No, absolutely
Wait,
not.
just wait. So, Arrowwood Environmental went out and did flag some additional wetland, what do you call it? Delineation boundaries, okay, thank you. I'll be honest with you, my son and I went out and took as many of the flags as we could find down after we recognized that it was on the Marcotte's property. So I think that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Was there any excavation done off of your land?
There has been no pre-construction work done for the Swanton project on anybody's land.
So you never did wetland studies, and you never did any kind of excavation work off of your property onto a neighbor?
So I think Martha just answered the question about putting the flags on Mr. Marcotte's property, who asked that the wetlands not be identified on his property because he didn't want them identified. Probably.
Yeah, would you say
That's it.
good time?
And then, in terms of any pre-construction work, there's been no pre-construction work done for the Swanton Wind project on anybody's property, including the lot.
Great, thanks. So, for the record, why, this is the property line, I'll show you folks too. This is the Marcotte property we have recently purchased. This is all wetland flagging. That goes almost 1,800 feet across the property line. And just to refresh your memory, Martha, that's the map. Right? Almost 1,800 feet.
Oh, I didn't go that far.
Yeah, I know. So my sugar bush is riddled with wetland flagging still 2 years later.
Well, gee whiz, you should have brought it
You
to
should.
our attention
I
2 years
did.
ago.
I did. And when the Marcotte's owned the land, I can look up the date, I called the Marcotte's and informed them that wetland flagging has happened. And,
Well, we would be happy to take it down. We're
well,
not trying to.
I really don't care about the flagging.
Well,
How come
you do?
I still can
One at
go?
a time, please, stop talking over each other.
Sorry.
No, it's just the court reporter can't do her job.
Sorry, man. Who wants to go? Okay, here's my question. Why today can I go on your website and pull up this map as part of your website?
The wetland delineation information is on their map. That's
Yeah, this is still part of your petition, I believe. It's not? It certainly is. That's still on, I can go,
Well, here's what I suspect. I don't know, okay, and so, well, first of all, first and foremost, we'll fix it, okay? I have no intention of doing something that is not what you would like, okay? So, I will be sure that that is taken down tomorrow. Ryan, make a note, please.
you filed your petition.
No.
It now is part of state record.
No, those are the files.
Folks, if I could just for a moment, what we're trying to focus on here is questions about the project's impacts to wetlands. This actually sounds like something of a personal dispute.
No, this is,
Excuse me, let me finish. And it sounds like they're willing to work it out with you and to get the flagging out of there if you want it out of there. But what we need to do is focus on questions about impacts to wetlands, okay?
okay, and this is also a question about a developer trespassing on a neighbor's land.
Trespass is not under the board's jurisdiction.
Okay. My follow-up question, since I also in the beginning asked about pre-construction, this is a road. Here's the plot plan of our property. I grabbed my notes. This is a road that all of a sudden developed, coming across from Belial's property, right across the property line. There's a professional survey by O'Leary and Burke of a road that has been constructed almost 1,200 feet to the top of the mountain. And my question is, why would a neighbor take an excavator and rough a road in to the very top of the mountain and to the same exact spot that there's wetland delineation? That's my question as a neighbor.
Doesn't have anything to do with the project, so, do you know? I don't know.
It doesn't have anything to do with the project.
Wow.
It goes
We
through.
did not do any excavation. We
I can
did.
give you a date. I put a cable up, said no trespassing, Mark Doobie Sugar Bush, please stay out. We have a 14-minute video of walking this road, and my question is, as developers, wouldn't this be the time you should be on your best behavior? And it sure is looking to me like, what should I expect to come in the future?
Okay, if anybody has any questions on wetland impacts. Okay. Next is sufficiency of water supply and burden of existing water supply.
Yeah, I think we actually did kind of touch on that earlier. Next, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but maybe people have additional questions, is soil erosion. Okay. Looking at Mr. Doobie and wondering if he's going to have any questions. Transportation systems. I think AOT is filed as an intervener, and well, I know that you're an airline pilot, so I thought you might be interested in this topic.
Actually, I don't think they have.
No, I don't really have any questions.
Okay.
I will say one thing, since you asked me.
Sure.
I will say there is a bill in Congress, and The St. Albans radar facility is a DOD radar, and there's a bill in Congress.
Excuse me, Mr. Booth, when you say DOD, you mean Department of Defense?
Yeah, Department of Defense. I was surprised to know that the St. Albans radar facility has a direct feed to the FAA. It also has a direct feed to DOD, and it is a direct feed to weather radar. And I think you know that. I think it's really surprising to me that the FAA has said that there will be a degradation of this radar that is a federal asset. It's depicted on their map, and they've accepted this degradation, and this is not hyping it. They put it in their report, and that's because when the turbines are spinning at 196 miles an hour at their operating speeds, on the tip, the radar is a Doppler, and it senses velocity, and behind the radar there will be a false target projected. On a new radar, that wouldn't be the case. On this radar, because of the technology, that will be the case, and that is, of some concern to me, because basically behind that radar, behind the turbines, there will not be a capability. The FAA has told me the only way to mitigate that is to build a secondary radar, and they've given a permit to you, and so that's the way it is. But the truth is, it will be degraded, and people within the FAA have decided they'll accept that degradation, and that's a straight, honest truth. So any kind of intention about misrepresenting, in the media and stuff, that was not intentional. The fact is, it will degrade the radar, and as a former F-16 pilot who flew air defense missions defending this country, it's beyond my belief that we would build turbines as a country that would allow an air defense radar to be degraded. That's the words of the FAA. So, and that's just kind of like clear the air of any kind of misunderstanding. The FAA is giving you a permit. They've issued a determination of non-hazard.
Thank you.
Yeah, and as a father, I will say on the AOT issue, as a father of a son and a nephew, Mark's son and Muffin's son, flies helicopter sorties into Franklin County Regional, and as an airline pilot who saw friends hit a ridgeline in Hartford, Connecticut on an approach where they ran a Super 80 that went through the treetops that flamed out both engines, and they crashed, and the FAA gave approval for that approach. And so if I have some skepticism about the FAA, it's because I've seen situations like Hartford, you can Google it, 1991, Super 80 flamed out. So when people start putting, well-intentioned people, start putting obstacles on a ridgeline, as someone who's got 39 years of flying, I'm not making issues for anything other than to protect their son and my son, because the Army National Guard, and you know what upsets me as a former National Guard person is the FAA never asked the DOD people who use this facility. They only asked the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the DOD clearinghouse never asked the Adjutant General or the people who use Franklin County, and that's the Army National Guard. They fly Learjet, or the King Air, and they fly the Lakotas and the Blackhawks, and they do it here in Franklin County because they don't want to have the traffic they have at Burlington International. So you got your approval, but these issues are real, and people that make these determinations of no hazard, I hope there are no hazards. I hope there are no problems, and I'm sure you do too. So, but I do know the AOT, I've heard AOT is going to be the intervener. So, you're welcome.
Again, Mr. Carter.
Yeah,
It's late.
I understand. We want to try to stay focused on questions. I appreciate your concern.
I apologize, I'm trying to clear the air, so there is no question there.
Yeah, and I want to appreciate Brian's comment.
I appreciate your concerns based on your experience. And again, public hearing would be a good time to bring those concerns to the board's attention. The next topic is project impacts to educational services. Project impacts to municipal services.
project impacts to municipal services. Okay, the big one, aesthetics. Okay. We went over sound impacts already. Historic sites.
You said historic sites?
Historic sites, yes. Okay. Sorry, I missed your hand going.
No, I almost missed what you said there. Wasn't the original Swanton settlement on that ridge line? Did you ever really looked into that?
The project hired both archaeologists, Northeast Archaeology, and we hired historical preservationists, and they looked at the historic records for that area. And I have to say, you have to read the report, okay? And I think that their report addresses that. I've heard about there's a road that went over or something, and I thought they addressed that in the report. That they didn't find items. They did do test pits up along the ridge in, I think it was like 3 different areas. And then actually, we moved the road, and they had to come back and do more, because we moved the road into an area where they said that could be sensitive. But they did not find resources that the Division of Historic Preservation were applicable to their requirements.
And what about Abenakis? Have they
I
been
think
up
it's
there?
addressed in their study as well. I believe it is.
Yeah, so what they found was there was no cultural material was recovered during the survey, and it's unlikely that the project as planned will have an adverse effect on significant state or national registers of historic places, eligible or archaeological sites. And there's actually 3 documents in the filing that talk about both the scope of work that was conducted in consultation with the Division of Historic Preservation, the testing that was done, and then what's called the end of field letter with the summary. And what I just read you was the abstract conclusion that has been accepted by the Division of Historic Preservation.
Now, let's say they start the project and they dig up something, they find something that's back then, will they stop the project entirely?
Well, that's a great question. It depends. The Division of Historic Preservation, I'm sorry they're not here. Both their counsel and Jamie Duggan were here. They didn't expect anyone to actually have questions. So I will report back. But there are particular requirements depending on what they find. And whether it's significant. I understand that if it's human remains, they have to stop work, no question. If it's not human remains, I don't think they do. I think what they have to do is do a consultation to see whether the resource is potentially significant, and then they make adjustments.
We notified
But at some point, though, as interveners, we would be able to do our own on-site studies to ground truth what the application has said. Is that correct? And get up there with our own experts?
So I think if you heard the discussion earlier,
Right.
Ms. Cadwell pointed out that there are discovery mechanisms to seek access to the property, and as my addition to that was, if there's a disagreement about it, then the board would have to resolve that disagreement.
Okay. Because we have some folks that do want to get up on there.
Okay.
Explore.
Okay, next up is rare and irreplaceable natural areas. The lingo is RENA. So if you ever hear that, that's what they're talking about. Next, next is wildlife, necessary habitat, and endangered species. Yes, sir. You've been very patient. I know that this was the topic.
Hi, my name is Ken Fox. I live in Fairfield. And my question is regarding the bird surveys that were done by you folks. So apparently, I guess my question is, was your survey that inclusive of all migratory activity in the fall, which is the period of time when I'm talking about, it'd be the fall of 2015?
Was it all inclusive?
Well, let me put it this way. Your survey began in the middle of September. And by, the middle of August. And by September, I could look at my notes, by September 25th, you've done 6 of your 10 surveys. And you were completed with your bird migration studies by, I believe, October 28th, somewhere in there. And I guess my question is that very inclusive as to the migratory season?
So I'm not, so the work was done by Stantec, and as you
Right.
pointed out, they're not here tonight.
Right.
Adam Gravel, and I know that you've read their report and his testimony. I will add that Adam worked with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and they agree upon a scope of survey period. The objective is to hit the peak periods of migration, and I appreciate, we did talk during one of the breaks. I
Sure.
appreciate that you have a question about whether that was a long enough migration period,
You bet.
right? Okay. And I can't answer that. I am certainly not an ornithologist, but I can say that they have worked with the state of Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife to set a protocol that provides information to the Agency of Natural Resources for a level of comfort for them to be able to evaluate the project.
Would you think that a survey that extended beyond that period of time would be helpful in understanding migratory activity in the area of the turbines?
I can't answer that. I'm not an expert in that.
Okay.
Yep, I can certainly ask Adam Gravel.
Would you think, I'm sure I'm going to get the same answer, would you think, since this survey was done by you during 1 year, 2015, that it might be helpful to get a better picture of migratory activity in that area, to do another survey in 2016?
So part of the methodology, I think it's most relevant to look at the methodology that's applied. And as part of the methodology, they also do look at what other resource information is available within the proximity of the project.
So in other words, if I submitted something to them, that would be something they would consider. But for your part, you're happy with a survey that started in the middle of August and was concluded by the middle of October?
For my part, I'm happy that we meet the requirements and the requests of the Agency of Natural Resources.
Okay, thank you. I'll just say for me, it's kind of a short season for migratory activity that I've observed in, I don't know, 40 years out there. Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Colby.
So, to go on that, what we would have to do, like Ken has suggested, is we would have to use our own data and facts, and how much would those be respected, I guess, could be the right choice of words, for like Ken, who's lived on there for 40 years, me, only 17 years, but who know that the geese, the eagles, the raptors, the loons, the heron, all those birds stay practically till almost the first freeze over. And everyone who lives there knows that and enjoys that. And, you know, we see them flying. And then the other thing is, if you didn't have the Met Tower up, how did you gauge the distance of the height of eagles and raptors and things like that? How did you judge the distance of them flying directly into the turbines, which we see all the time, that they would be flying directly into the turbines?
So again, I didn't do the studies. Stantec did the studies. These folks have done a lot of studies. I don't know the number, but it's actually, I think, mentioned in their report when I was reviewing it before it came today. They've worked from Maine to West Virginia to Pennsylvania. They have offices actually all over the U.S. And I can tell you that they are trained. They have requirements that they go through in terms of being able to identify and measure. They take metrics, all sorts of metrics. They take weather, they take time of day, foliage, you know, there's a whole list of the criteria that when they're doing their surveys, they document. And then lastly, again, I have to, first of all, so again, I would say that they're doing their studies based upon collaborative and informed recommendations from the Agency of Natural Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife. The other thing, regarding the information and data that you have, I would highly recommend that you share that with the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
We have,
Yeah.
actually, you have all that information at A&R, Add Fish and Wildlife, it's all been submitted to you.
So would you have to acquire, I'm assuming, a takings permit for birds and endangered bats?
I would expect so.
You know, based on the financial hardship, like all existing wind projects. And how many, when would we know how many would be allowed to be killed annually? When does that answer? And what did the surveys indicate as to like bird kills or takes? You know,
I think
is
those
there like an
results are-
average or something?
I think those results are all, well, I don't think. I know those results of the survey data that was collected are in the reports, and they're summarized lengthfully, it's not a word, but sorry, in the back. And as far as the taking permit, we would anticipate the taking permit to be applied for and secured prior to installation of the wind turbines or during construction, prior to operation.
Okay.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Bridget Butler. I'm from St. Albans City. I'm curious about the opportunity here to look at ways to work together in terms of taking of birds or endangered bats. So is there an opportunity here to use things like radar during peak migration periods to slow the rate at which or stop the wind turbines if we are seeing a peak migration happening? Is there an opportunity there to work along those lines?
Yes. I want to say two things to that. One is the project would expect and anticipates that we will do operational monitoring, so to see what activity is occurring during operation. And again, that will be in consultation with the Agency of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Department. The other thing that wind technology, wind Bat Conservation International, other entities such as that have found, and I would expect and will be implemented here, is for certain operational conditions, the turbines would be curtailed, stopped, under, let's say, low wind speeds in the summer when there's a much higher probability of the bats being in a rotational swept area of the rotor. But to answer your question in a broad picture, we want to talk about it.
I think there's an opportunity here to do that. You know, the American Birding Association has guidelines for smart wind in order to kind of get there. And there are plenty of people in the birding community who would be willing to step up and monitor after the turbines, if the turbines were to go in afterwards, in order to get some baseline data that we all know that we need in order to kind of find the common ground here. So I think there's a great opportunity here for that and to build off of the data that Ken has collected so that we can make good decisions moving forward.
Did you say your name?
Yeah, I'm Bridget Butler.
Thank you.
I guess I'm so happy to hear that, Bridget, and I had reached
Yeah,
out to you like.
you and I have emailed back and forth
Yes.
and then had it drop away. So.
Right, or like over, whatever, almost.
A year, yeah, almost 2 years, yeah.
But, I love that you're, oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you,
Top
yeah.
of each other.
Thank you. Yeah.
I love that you suggested that monitoring because, obviously, you're well aware that over the last 6-8 years, there's an enormous lack of trust in the process and the transparency of the situation. And, and like I said, how do we know? It's kind of like the ditches and the culverts and the check dams. How do we know they're being cleaned out? And nobody from the opposition can be up to monitor it. And it's the same with the bird and bat kills. And we know that the brown bat, the endangered brown bat, has returned, and it's been seen in the studies. And I would like to know if Swanton Wind would agree to have scheduled checks where these bird and bat kill studies are not done and the dead eagles are not picked up until a member from the American Birding Association can go on a scheduled trip, because that has not been done on any other site. And so I'm not sure if we're getting an accurate picture. And I would like to know if Swanton Wind would agree to working with them and promise that we get an accurate picture of the bird and bat, because that is a major migratory path across Fairfield Pond to the fields on the other side across Route 105. Major.
So, I would expect, as representing this project, that the project will most likely, I would expect to it will have a taking permit, and part of that permit will address what mitigation steps can be done. As I said before, I would expect that there will be multiple years of operational monitoring for birds and bats, and I can relate that on one project that I know of, part of the operational, part of the procedures under the taking permit are that if a bird or bat is found, we call the project called the Department of Fish and Wildlife. It actually happened, and we worked with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the species was gathered, and we followed the protocol. So, at that project. I don't see that it would be any different at this project.
Does anyone know the data on the repository of eagles killed, bald and golden eagles? But there's like a database that I think we should get to you, Bridget, of what they've collected that has never been documented or tracked.
Yeah, Ms. Penelope, we need to
Yeah.
move on. Those are conversations that you can certainly have with folks after we're done here. So.
Thank you. Sorry.
Next is use of natural resources. Okay. I think the next one is greenhouse gas impacts, but I think we kind of went over that in pretty extensive detail earlier. Project impacts to public investments. The next one is the project's consistency with the least cost integrated resource plan, which does not apply to this particular project. So, the next one is the project's compliance with the state's electric plan. Okay. The next one is waste to energy facility, which this is not. The next one is whether the project can be served economically by existing or planned transmission facilities.
Yes, sir.
Well, all I want to add is, as an advocate for Swanton Electric, is that these projects typically have added cost, which adds rates. I mean, whether it be extra cost because of effects on Alco with extra transmission changes and pickups, whether we are requested to purchase a certain percentage of the VEPI power that this could be sold to, which again affects our rates. There's 14 publicly owned, not-for-profit electric companies in Vermont, and collectively we would all be affected by this. And our rates are so high as it is now, it's difficult to entice businesses to come here.
That's basically the statutory criteria. So I guess if we're getting to the point where we need to start cleaning up the room soon, but if people have any general questions, and these are questions for Swanton Wind about the project that is proposed, and I know people want to get up and make comments and express how they feel about the project and their concerns, but that's for another day. That will happen, it can happen. The piece of paper that got passed around has information on how to submit comments either electronically or in writing to the Public Service Board. That can happen at any time. So there will be avenues and opportunities for that to happen. But if anybody has any just general questions about the project that's been proposed, we can take about 5 minutes to do that.
I'm curious about the, and I'm sorry if this is in here, has been in the project, but the Queechee analysis, who does that? Who does the Queechee analysis?
David
For
Raphael,
your
he's
team
not
here.
here.
Pardon me?
A fellow named David Raphael from Landworks, he's not here.
Landworks, David Raphael.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming out. I wish there were more people here still so I could say thank you to them, but thank you all for hanging out till the end of the evening. I know it's been a long day and a long evening. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you.